Hey there, tonight we're diving into the rhythmic clang of hammers and the glow of fiery forges to uncover what blacksmithing was really like in ancient Greece. Not the mythic tales of gods and heroes, but the surprising reality of the artisans whose crafted tools shaped civilizations. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you ever thought your daily grind in the 21st century was tough, let me introduce you to a humble day in the life of an apprentice blacksmith in ancient Greece. The sun has barely peeked over the horizon, but you're already up, ready to plunge right into the city's heart, the bustling agora of Athens. Now, forget the romanticized visions of pristine white togas and philosophical debates. Here, it's all about the clang of hammers on anvils and the scent of burning charcoal. Blacksmithing, my friend, was the ancient world's version of a tech startup. Iron, that was your smartphone, your internet, your entire digital ecosystem. As you navigate through the crowd, you realize that blacksmithing is more than just a job. It's the backbone of the economy. Without it, no weapons, no tools, no infrastructure. In ancient Greece, iron was as central to life as Instagram is to influencers. You're apprenticing under a master smith who's seen it all. He's like the Steve Jobs of ironwork, minus the turtleneck. His forge isn't just any random hole in the wall. It's a respected institution, thanks to the guilds that regulate who gets to swing a hammer. Guilds are like the gatekeepers of the trade. They set the rules, ensure quality, and yes, they also decide who gets to join the prestigious ranks of blacksmiths. They're a cross between a trade union and the world's strictest HOA. You'll need to pay your dues, both in terms of money and sweat. Speaking of money, tools aren't cheap. A basic set, an anvil, tongs, and a hammer could cost you a small fortune. Imagine shelling out the equivalent of several months' wages just to get started. You've got your eye on a shiny new hammer, the envy of every apprentice. But your master casually reminds you it'll set you back about 30 drachmas. That's serious cash, given that the average worker might earn only about 2 to 3 drachmas a day. This is why apprenticeships are crucial. You're not just learning the craft, you're earning the tools and techniques that will, hopefully, pay off later. As you stroll through the agora, taking in the cacophony of traders and citizens, you can't help but notice the sheer variety of iron goods being peddled. From weapons to farming implements, it's a smorgasbord of metalwork. You're witnessing firsthand how blacksmithing fuels the local economy. The demand for iron is insatiable, driven by everything from military campaigns to the simple need for household items. This isn't just about hammering out a sword, it's about shaping the very fabric of society. While the idea of learning under a master might feel restrictive, there's a certain appeal to it. You're not just an apprentice, you're part of a living tradition. Your master learned from his master, and so on, all the way back to the days when the first piece of iron was smelted. In a world without Google, this passing of knowledge is as crucial as it is sacred. But let's not kid ourselves. There's a brutal side to this gig. Ironworking is labor-intensive and dangerous. The forge is an inferno, the tools are heavy, and the hours are long. You might romanticize the idea of crafting a perfect sword, yet the reality involves blisters, burns, and a whole lot of sweat. And unlike the tales of blacksmiths wielding magical hammers, your work is down to earth, literally. The guilds, while protective of their craft, also wield significant power. They can make or break careers, and while they ensure standards, they're not above a little politicking. Want to open your own forge someday? Better make sure you've got their blessing, or you might find yourself out of business before you've struck your first deal. As the sun climbs higher and the day grows warmer, you head back to the forge, ready to put in your time at the anvil. Each clang of the hammer is a small step toward mastery. It's a long road, but you've got the grit to stick with it. Today, you might just be an apprentice, but in the grand scheme of things, you're part of something much larger. You're shaping the tools and weapons that will define this era. Ironically, while the world sees blacksmithing as a hard, gritty trade, you know it's as vital and influential as any lofty philosophical discourse happening in the agora. By evening, you're exhausted but satisfied. You've learned more than just how to shape metal. You've had a crash course in economics, social dynamics, and the harsh realities of trade regulation. You're not just swinging a hammer, you're part of an ancient economy that's as complex and cutthroat as any modern industry. As you lay down to rest, the cool Athenian breeze sweeping through your room, you know you'll rise again tomorrow, ready to face the heat of the forge and the intricacies of a world where iron is king. As you drift off, knowing that tomorrow you'll be back at the forge, let's zoom in on what awaits you, a day in the life of a blacksmith's apprentice in ancient Greece, where the real drama unfolds not in the amphitheaters, but in the suffocating heat of the workshop. Picture it, a space filled with the scent of scorched metal and sweat. This is where the magic, or rather, the gritty reality, happens. First, let's talk tools. Forget the sleek, ergonomic designs of modern gadgets. Here, you're looking at a collection of instruments that would make a medieval torture device look like child's play. The anvil, that iconic hunk of iron, is your best friend and your worst enemy. Weighing anywhere from 50 to 100 kilograms, it's not just a tool, it's a symbol. An anvil is to a blacksmith what a canvas is to a painter. But unlike a canvas, if you drop it on your foot, you're in for a world of hurt. Then there's the hammer, a deceptively simple tool that can make or break your work, quite literally. It's not just about brute force, it's about precision. Swing it wrong, and you're not just risking the project, but also your fingers. Ever heard the phrase, hit the nail on the head? Well, if you can't hit the metal in exactly the right spot, you're going to be stuck reshaping that piece of iron more times than you'd care to count. Now, let's not forget the bellows. This isn't your typical fireplace accessory. These bellows are the lungs of the forge, and they're as temperamental as a cat on a hot tin roof. Your job is to keep the fire roaring without turning the place into a pyrotechnics show. The goal is to maintain a steady, white-hot flame that can reach temperatures upwards of 200 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than a Greek summer, my friend, and just standing near it feels like you're auditioning for a role in Hades' underworld. And while we're on the subject of heat, let's debunk a little myth. Blacksmithing is often romanticized as a noble craft, a dance with fire. But in reality, it's more like trench warfare with a furnace. You're constantly at risk of burns, not to mention the inhalation of fumes that could make even the most seasoned smoker cough. Protective gear. You're lucky if you've got a leather apron and some thick gloves. Forget about OSHA regulations. Here, your safety protocol is don't get burnt. The physical demands of the job are another level of intense. Think of it as CrossFit, but with real consequences. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping yourself into a human machine capable of hammering for hours on end. And let's not sugarcoat it. Blacksmithing is hard on the body. Your muscles are constantly strained. Your back aches from the repetitive motion, and your hands are calloused like you've been hugging a cactus. The romantic notion of a blacksmith as a burly hero with rippling muscles. Sure, if you consider those muscles as a byproduct of sheer necessity rather than some heroic ideal. Now, about those long hours. You're not just punching a time clock here. You're living by the sun and the demands of your patrons. Need a new plowshare? Better get cracking, because harvest waits for no one. A broken sword for a soldier. That's not just a job. That's a matter of life and death. You're working from sunrise to sunset, and sometimes even beyond if the order is urgent. Time management is crucial, but it's not always in your control. Your schedule is dictated by the whims of the fire and the needs of the city. Contrary to the romanticized image of a blacksmith as a solitary artist, this is a team sport. You're not alone in the forge. You've got your fellow apprentices and journeymen, each with their roles. The master blacksmith orchestrates the chaos, and let's be honest, he's more drill sergeant than mentor. You're expected to learn by doing, and mistakes are not just frowned upon. They're opportunities for some stern, shall we say, constructive criticism. And let's talk injuries. A simple slip, and you've got a burn or a cut that'll keep you out of commission for days. There's a reason old blacksmiths have hands that look like road maps. Each scar tells a story, not of valor, but of survival in a craft that's as unforgiving as it is essential. In a world where medical care consists of herbs and a prayer, staying in one piece is an accomplishment all its own. But despite the hardships, there's a certain undeniable allure to the craft. You're not just making objects, you're creating tools that build civilizations. Those spears and swords, they're the difference between victory and defeat. That plowshare, it feeds a family. Every piece of metal you shape has a purpose bigger than itself, and so do you. You're part of a lineage that stretches back through centuries, a living link in a chain of artisans who have shaped the world one hammer strike at a time. So, as the morning progresses and the sweat trickles down your brow, remember this. While the world may romanticize the blacksmith as some mythical figure, the truth is far more compelling. You're not just hammering iron, you're forging history, one blister at a time. And that, in its own gritty, brutal way, is a legacy worth every drop of sweat. Stick around, because the day isn't over yet, and neither is the story. As the morning labors wind down and the sun reaches its zenith, it's time to take a much-needed break. The midday meal is as important as the work itself. It's when you finally get to step back from the incessant clang of the forge and examine the broader picture of your role in Greek society. You sit under the shade of an olive tree, your muscles aching and your mind buzzing with the morning's tasks, and ponder just where you fit into this grand tapestry. In the hierarchy of ancient Greece, blacksmiths are an interesting case. They're not at the top, rubbing elbows with the elite, but they're certainly not at the bottom either. You might not be showered in laurels like a victorious general, but without your work, those generals wouldn't have their shiny armor or lethal swords. Talk about job security. In fact, during the classical Greek period, roughly 500-323 BC, the demand for military gear was so high that blacksmiths were like rock stars, if rock stars were perpetually sweaty and covered in soot. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into that societal standing. You see, blacksmiths occupied this sweet spot where they were indispensable, yet often overlooked. Kind of like tech support in a modern corporation. You're the unsung hero of every Greek phalanx, the hidden hand behind each bronze breastplate and iron-tipped spear. When Homer speaks of warriors clad in bronze armor in the Iliad, he's indirectly tipping his hat to the blacksmiths who made it all possible. Sure, Achilles gets all the glory, but try fighting a war in a toga and see how that works out. The economic clout of blacksmiths also can't be ignored. With Athens' military machinery churning out campaigns like an assembly line, the demand for weapons and armor was insatiable. This wasn't just a local affair either. Greek blacksmiths sometimes found their work contested in the international markets. Armor and weapons were hot commodities, and the quality of Greek craftsmanship was lauded far and wide. Even the mighty Persian Empire had to acknowledge the superiority of Greek metalwork, albeit grudgingly. But before you get too comfortable basking in this glow of importance, here's a reality check. Being crucial doesn't always translate to being celebrated. Blacksmiths were often seen as necessary, but were kept at arm's length by the upper crust of society. The political elite respected the craft, but didn't exactly want to socialize with those who practiced it. It's a bit like respecting your dentist, but not inviting them to your wedding. And let's be honest, the job wasn't glamorous. It was a world of soot and sweat, not exactly the stuff of epic poetry. While Homer might sing of battles and heroes, there's a glaring absence of verses dedicated to the blacksmith who forged the mighty sword. You're the invisible hand, the cog in the machine, and sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. But take heart, your contribution is as critical as any strategist or warrior. So what's for lunch? Well, don't expect a lavish spread reminiscent of a Greek symposium. A simple meal of bread, olives, and maybe some cheese if you're lucky, washed down with watered-down wine, is your usual fare. But here's a fun fact. Even your humble meal plays into the larger narrative. Olive oil, a staple of your diet, is a product of the same trees that fuel your forge. It's a symbiotic relationship, much like the one you have with the city-state you serve. As you nibble on your lunch, you might overhear snatches of conversation about the latest political maneuverings or the results of the most recent Olympic Games. Just remember, while the politicians and athletes are the ones getting cheered on, it's your hard work that's quietly enabling their successes. You're the silent partner in their triumphs, even if your name doesn't make it into the history books. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the political landscape. The city-states of Greece were a hotbed of rivalries and alliances, and blacksmiths were unwittingly drawn into these power plays. In times of war, your workload would skyrocket, with urgent orders coming in for everything from spearheads to chariot fittings. Peace might bring a lull in military commissions, but it also opened opportunities for more domestic creations, plowshares, sickles, and the like. It's like being a seasonal worker, but with a more existential stake in the game. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion of blacksmiths as solitary figures. In reality, The forge was as much a social hub as it was a workplace. You'd share stories, trade techniques, and yes, even gossip. It was a community in its own right, a place where knowledge was passed down and friendships were forged, pun fully intended. This camaraderie was essential, not just for morale, but for innovation. Techniques were shared, styles evolved, and the craft progressed in ways that a lone smith could never achieve. As your midday meal wraps up, you're reminded of the inescapable link between your work and the broader Greek world. Blacksmithing isn't just about metal. It's about maintaining the very structure of society. The tools you create are the gears that keep the clock of civilization ticking. And while you might not be hailed as a hero in your own time, future generations will look back and see the impact of your craft woven into the very fabric of history. So, as you stand up, dust the crumbs from your tunic, and prepare to return to the forge, remember this. While the world may not always acknowledge the blacksmith with the same reverence it reserves for warriors and statesmen, your contribution is the steel backbone of Greek society. The day isn't over yet, and neither is the story. There are still fires to stoke, metal to shape, and legends to support, one hammer strike at a time. As you rise from your midday respite and head back to the forge, you brace yourself for the next chapter of the day. It's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of blacksmithing in ancient Greece, a world where the mundane meets the monumental. First on the agenda, the humble nail. Yes, nails. Not exactly the stuff of epic poetry, but try building a trireme without them and see how far you get. Crafting nails is a dance of precision and patience. Each nail starts as a slender rod of iron, heated until it's glowing like the Athenian sun. You hammer it with machine-like regularity, shaping the head and point with deft precision. It's repetitive and mind-numbing, but hey, so is scrolling through cat memes on the internet. Nail-making might sound basic, but in a society where construction was booming, they were indispensable. Think of them as the original tiny house movement, small but essential. Now, let's gallop over to horseshoes. Here's a fun fact. While the Greeks didn't quite invent the horseshoe as we know it, they did use a form of hoof protection. These were more like sandals, strapped onto the hooves, because even horses needed a little flair while trotting through history. A good blacksmith could craft these with an eye for detail, ensuring they fit perfectly. It's a bit like being a cobbler, but for creatures that could trample you if they got spooked. And let's not overlook household wares, pots, pans, and the occasional spit for roasting. These items were the cornerstones of domestic life. Imagine an ancient Greek kitchen without a cauldron. It's like trying to cook Thanksgiving dinner in a microwave. For these, the process involves heating and hammering sheets of iron into shape, a task that requires skill and a touch of artistry. Your pieces aren't just functional, they're a testament to your craftsmanship. Now, what about the technological advancements that made all this possible? While we're not talking about the ancient equivalent of an iPhone launch, there were innovations. One major leap was the development of better smelting techniques, allowing for purer iron. This wasn't just some geeky endeavor, it was revolutionary. Better iron meant stronger tools and weapons, which in turn meant, you guessed it, economic and military superiority. It's like upgrading from dial-up to fiber optics, game-changing. And speaking of change, let's wander off the beaten path to discuss trade networks. Greek blacksmithing techniques didn't just stay put within the city walls. They spread across the Mediterranean like a culinary trend. The Greeks were to metalwork what the Italians are to pasta, masters with a penchant for perfection. Their wares reached as far as Egypt and Persia, thanks to bustling trade routes. Heck, even the Romans couldn't resist getting their hands on some of that sweet Greek ironwork. But before you start planning your own ancient startup, remember, competition was fierce. Imported goods, especially from places like Phoenicia and Egypt, posed a significant threat. These foreign artisans were no slouches, and their techniques were often cheaper or more suited to local tastes. It's like trying to sell ice cream in a town that's already got a gelato shop on every corner. The pressure was on to innovate or be outclassed. Economically, it was a high-stakes game. The Greek city-states were like modern corporations, always looking for an edge, always grappling with supply and demand. A single fluctuation in the price of iron could send ripples through the market. And don't even get me started on the whims of war. One minute, you're flush with orders for spears. The next, peace breaks out, and suddenly everyone wants plowshares. Your livelihood ebbs and flows with the tides of history, and you have to navigate this sea with the skill of Odysseus. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. As a blacksmith, you're caught in a web of social expectations and economic realities. You're a craftsman, yes, but also a businessman, a diplomat, and sometimes even a bit of a spy, gleaning information from your clients and passing it along. After all, in a world where information is power, the blacksmith's shop is a hub of news and gossip. It's the ancient equivalent of a coffee shop, where deals are made and secrets are spilled over the hiss of steam and clang of metal. So, as you return to your forge, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the workshop floor, remember this: you're not just shaping metal, you're shaping the world. Each nail, horseshoe, and household item is a piece of the puzzle that is Greek society. And while the world may not always see the blacksmith as a hero, history knows better. Your work is the silent force driving the wheels of progress, and that's a legacy worth hammering home. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel in this saga of fire and iron. The day isn't over, and neither is your story. There are more fires to stoke, more metal to shape, and more history to forge. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the bustling city of Athens, it's time to take stock of the day's work and reflect on the enduring legacy of blacksmithing in ancient Greece. You've spent hours at the anvil, hammering out the tools and weapons that are the backbone of this vibrant civilization. But as the fiery glow of the forge dims, it's worth pondering what all this clanging and banging has really accomplished in the grand tapestry of history. Let's start by addressing the not-so-small matter of myth versus reality. You know those romanticized tales of blacksmiths as warriors, wielding their hammers like Thor himself? Yeah, those make for great storytelling, but fall short of the truth. Most blacksmiths weren't gallivanting around with swords drawn, ready to leap into battle. They were too busy perfecting the balance of an actual sword, ensuring it didn't snap at the first clash of combat. The idea that every blacksmith was a battle-hardened hero is as accurate as claiming every modern-day programmer is a cybernetic ninja. Spoiler alert, they're not. True, blacksmiths were central to the military might of Greece, but their role was more akin to today's defense contractors than frontline warriors. The weapons they crafted, from the bronze-tipped spears of the hoplites to the intricate armor plating, were the real stars of the show. These tools of war were the unsung heroes of countless victories, but it was the smith's skill, not their presence on the battlefield, that made them legendary. Now, on to the legacy. Blacksmiths in ancient Greece laid the groundwork for technological advancements that would ripple through history long after their forges went cold. Imagine, if you will, a world without iron. No swords, no plowshares, no bridges. It sounds like a nightmare, right? The innovations that Greek blacksmiths developed, like advanced smelting techniques and the introduction of wrought iron, were the building blocks of future civilizations. They transformed iron from a rare novelty into the cornerstone of industrial progress, a bit like turning a quirky garage startup into a tech giant. You see, ancient blacksmiths were the original tech innovators. While they didn't have the luxury of rapid prototyping or digital modeling, they relied on a mix of trial, error, and a deep understanding of their materials to push boundaries. The development of the iron bloomery furnace, for example, allowed them to produce iron in larger quantities and with greater purity. This wasn't just a small step. It was a giant leap for metallurgy, akin to upgrading from a flip phone to the latest smartphone. And much like today's tech titans, these blacksmiths were constantly iterating, improving their craft with each strike of the hammer. But let's not forget the economic impact. Blacksmithing wasn't just a craft, it was a vital industry. By the 4th century BC, Athens was a hub of trade and commerce, and the demand for iron goods was insatiable. The economic engine of the city-state was fueled by the relentless production of tools and weapons, much of which can be traced back to the smiths sweating over their anvils. The bustling trade routes of the Mediterranean were alive with Greek ironwork, and their reputation for quality was firmly established. It's a bit like how Italian leather goods are coveted today, a mark of unparalleled craftsmanship and durability. And while we're on the subject of economic clout, let's talk about something that often gets overlooked: the role of blacksmiths in social mobility. In a society where your birth often dictated your fate, mastering a craft like blacksmithing provided a rare opportunity for upward movement. Sure, you wouldn't be hobnobbing with the aristocracy, but a skilled blacksmith could command respect and a decent living, carving out a niche in the social hierarchy. Think of it as the ancient version of learning to code, a skill that could elevate your status and open doors that might otherwise remain closed. As the last embers fade and the workshop grows quiet, it's clear that the legacy of these ancient artisans extends far beyond their own lifetimes. They were the unsung architects of a technological revolution, their innovations laying the groundwork for the Roman Empire's expansion, and later, the industrial advances of the Renaissance. The tools they crafted, the techniques they perfected, and the economic networks they supported were the foundations upon which future empires would rise. The fires they lit in their forges sparked a chain reaction across history, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity. So, as you pack away your tools and head home under the starlit sky, remember this. While the world may have moved on from the clang of hammer on anvil, the spirit of the blacksmith lives on in every piece of technology that shapes our modern lives. The legacy of those ancient artisans is etched into the very fabric of history, a testament to their skill, innovation, and enduring impact. It's a legacy forged in fire, tempered by time, and as resilient as the iron they shaped. And that, my friend, is a story worth telling. The scene opens somewhere around 3100 BCE in a place so fertile it's often called the cradle of civilization. No, it's not a trendy brunch spot with overpriced avocado toast. It's Mesopotamia, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq. Let's be clear right off the bat. These folks weren't lounging in hammock-sipping pina coladas. They were knee-deep in irrigation trenches, trying to figure out how not to starve. Forget grand palaces. Think more along the lines of a muddy boot camp. The Sumerians, the rock stars of this era, started popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and by 3100 BCE, they'd laid the foundations of what we call civilization. Imagine Uruk, one of those early city-states, as the ancient world's version of a bustling pop-up diner. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a bustling metropolis with a population of up to 50,000. That's like filling Madison Square Garden more than twice over, with a few goats thrown in for good measure. Now, here's a myth-buster for you. Ancient Sumer wasn't about gleaming towers and pristine marble. It was more about figuring out how not to drown in their own irrigation systems. They didn't have the luxury of time to dream up architectural marvels because they were too busy making sure their crops didn't turn into a swampy mess. It was the ultimate balancing act, managing water like a high-stakes game of Jenga. One wrong move, and splash, your barley's swimming. Speaking of waterworks, these folks were the OG engineers. They carved out complex networks of canals and ditches, which sounds like a fun Saturday project until you realize it was a matter of life and death. They weren't doing it for a gold star. They were doing it to ensure they had enough grain to get through the next season. And they weren't just winging it. They had math on their side. Early forms of arithmetic and geometry were likely developed to keep their irrigation systems in check. Calculators may be for the weak, but Sumerians had clay tablets and a knack for numbers. The political scene in Mesopotamia was as cutthroat as a reality TV show, with city-states like Uruk, Lagash, and vying for dominance. Rulers were more like local strongmen than benevolent kings, and their power was directly tied to their ability to control water resources. You think political campaigns get dirty now? Try a mud-slinging contest where actual mud is involved. The Sumerians also had their quirks and charms. They invented cuneiform writing around 3200 BCE, which looked more like a game of Tetris played with wedges and clay than anything resembling an alphabet. But hey, it worked. They were able to keep track of everything from grain supplies to epic poems. And while we're talking about myths, let's not forget the legendary Gilgamesh, whose exploits were immortalized in one of the earliest known pieces of literature. Sure, the stories are larger than life, but they give us a peek into what mattered to these ancient people, gods, kings, and the relentless quest for immortality. Economically, these city-states were quite the innovators. They developed trade networks that extended beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia, dealing in everything from textiles to grains. They even had a form of currency, though it was more likely to be barley than Bitcoin. The Sumerians set the stage for economic systems that would evolve over millennia. So, as we close this chapter on the early days of Mesopotamia, remember that the cradle of civilization was less about grandeur and more about grit. It was a world where survival depended on a delicate dance with nature, a world where the true power was harnessed in the muddy waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. Mesopotamia wasn't about building castles in the air. It was about digging ditches in the ground. That's the real story, raw and unfiltered, and it's just the beginning. But let's row our metaphorical boat down the Nile and see how things were cooking in ancient Egypt, circa 3100 BCE. We're not here to gawk at pyramids or drool over gold-laden sarcophagi. Save that for the tourists. Instead, we're diving into the nitty-gritty of what really kept this civilization afloat. The annual inundation of the Nile, Mother Nature's clockwork gift that was more vital than any pharaoh's crown jewels. Now, while Mesopotamian farmers were busy playing a high-stakes game of irrigation Jenga, the Egyptians had their own watery version of fortune-telling. Each year, the Nile would flood its banks, leaving behind a fresh layer of nutrient-rich silt. It's like the ultimate cheat code for farming in the ancient world. This predictable cycle was the backbone of Egypt's agrarian economy, transforming their fields into a breadbasket that could rival even the most prolific brunch buffets. The only thing missing was a bottomless mimosa. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was a lifeline. It was the ancient equivalent of Wi-Fi, essential for survival and prosperity. The Egyptians even had a name for the floodwaters, Akhet, and this natural phenomenon was so crucial that it dictated their calendar. The inundation season, Akhet, lasted from July to November, marking a time of renewal and potential prosperity. Miss your flood? Well, you might as well start packing for a long, hungry summer. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sure, the Nile's flooding sounds like a lovely natural spa day for the land, but it was also a logistical headache. Planning for the flood was as essential as it was unpredictable. Pharaohs and their officials were like ancient meteorologists, anxiously watching the river's behavior. Too little water, and there wasn't enough silt for good crops. Too much, and villages could be washed. It was like trying to strike a balance in an ancient version of Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, just right. Speaking of pharaohs, let's clear up a little myth that's been floating around like a bad penny. The pyramids weren't built by slaves. Hollywood might have you imagining chains clinking and whips cracking, but the reality is a little less dramatic and a lot more organized. The labor force that constructed these monumental piles of stone was composed of skilled workers, not shackled slaves. These craftsmen were the ancient equivalent of today's engineers and architects, and they weren't working for free. They were paid in beer, a staple of the Egyptian diet, and bread, keeping them fueled for the massive task at hand. These workers were organized into crews, each with a hierarchy of skill and responsibility, much like a modern construction site. They lived in nearby camps, which were more like bustling towns, complete with bakeries, breweries, and even medical facilities. It was ancient Egypt's version of a company town, bustling with purpose and camaraderie. And here's a kicker. These laborers were drafted in a kind of national service, a civic duty that offered social mobility and job security. Now, why build pyramids in the first place? It wasn't just about showing off or housing the pharaoh's ego in stone. These were mega infrastructure projects, the ancient world's version of the Hoover Dam or the Panama Canal. They were designed to last, a testament to the pharaoh's power and a statement to the gods. In a society that viewed the afterlife as an extension of one's earthly existence, ensuring a pharaoh's smooth transition was a matter of national importance. The pyramids were like a permanent RSVP to the big party in the sky. And let's not forget the economic ripple effect of these projects. They created jobs, spurred the development of new technologies, and boosted trade networks. Stone had to be quarried, transported, and carved. Tools had to be made and maintained. The construction of these colossal structures was a driving force for the Egyptian economy, a bit like how the tech industry drives innovation today, minus the smartphones. In short, ancient Egypt was a land of calculated precision, where the real magic wasn't in the mystery of the pyramids, but in the mastery of the Nile. They didn't just build monuments. They built a civilization on the back of a river that played its part like clockwork. And as we keep paddling through history, remember that while the iconic imagery of towering pyramids might dazzle the eye, it was the humble, relentless flow of the Nile that truly shaped the destiny of ancient Egypt. Hang tight, because there's more to this tale, and we're just getting started. Flowing from the mighty Nile, let's wade upstream to another ancient wonder, the Indus Valley Civilization, which took its first breath around 2600 BCE. These folks weren't busy building monumental tombs or scribbling epic poems. Nope, they were revolutionizing indoor plumbing and urban planning. They may not have had pyramids to flaunt, but what they did have was a penchant for practicality that would make even the most fastidious organizer swoon. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the twin jewels of the Indus Valley crown, were cities planned with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Imagine streets laid out in a perfect grid, as if someone had taken a giant ruler to the landscape. You'd think they consulted an ancient Marie Kondo before deciding where to put their homes and public baths. These were no random sprawl of huts. They were sophisticated metropolises with public wells and drainage systems that would make some modern cities envious. It was less about conquering lands and more about conquering sanitation. Their drainage system, in particular, deserves a standing ovation, or at least a solid golf clap. We're talking about underground sewers that whisked waste away, keeping the streets cleaner than a whistle. These weren't mere trenches. They were an engineering marvel that made sure the water flowed in the right direction, away. It's like they took one look at the mess of Mesopotamian irrigation and said, "Hold my barley beer, we've got this." And while we're on the topic of water, let's talk about those great baths. No, they weren't just for splashing around. These were communal spaces, meticulously constructed with waterproof bricks, where people gathered for ritualistic purification. Imagine a pool party where the main attraction was spiritual cleansing rather than cannonballs. It's like the Indus Valley folk were running their own ancient spa, complete with the latest in brick-and-mortar hydrotherapy. But here's where things get a bit murky, literally and figuratively. Despite their advances in urban living, the Indus script remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Picture a toddler with a Rubik's Cube, and you've got the gist of where historians stand on this. The script, etched into seals and pottery, is as tantalizing as it is indecipherable. With over 400 symbols, it's like a complex code that could contain anything from epic tales to grocery lists. But until someone cracks it, we'll never know if they were penning sonnets or just noting down how much grain they owed. Speaking of grain, let's pivot to the economic engine of this civilization. The Indus Valley was an agrarian powerhouse, thanks to the fertile lands along the river. They cultivated wheat, barley, and peas, trading excess produce with neighbors near and far. They didn't just rely on Mother Nature's whims. They harnessed her power, ensuring that their granaries were as full as a Thanksgiving dinner table. These granaries, with their advanced ventilation systems, were strategically placed to ensure that no grain went to waste, much like an ancient version of climate-controlled storage. Trade wasn't just local, either. The Indus merchants were like ancient Amazon Prime, shipping goods across vast distances. They bartered with Mesopotamia, exchanging cotton textiles and beads for silver and tin. It's like they were running a Bronze Age Silk Road, minus the camels. This trade network was so extensive that Indus Valley seals have been found as far away as the Arabian Peninsula, proving that their influence was widespread, even if their history remains shrouded in mystery. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as persistent as a cat meme, the romantic notion of an Indus Valley utopia. Sure, their cities were marvels of planning and sanitation, but life wasn't all sunshine and perfectly aligned streets. The lack of grand monuments or palatial residences suggests a society that valued practical living over ostentatious displays of power. It was less about who had the biggest statue and more about who had the most efficient sewage system. That's not to say they were devoid of hierarchy. Leadership was likely based on merit and wisdom rather than brute strength. Politically, the Indus Valley seems to have been as peaceful as they come, with no evidence of a standing army or even defensive walls around their cities. It's as if they collectively decided they'd rather solve disputes over a cup of tea, or whatever their ancient equivalent was, instead of drawing swords. This absence of military might seem idyllic, but it leaves historians scratching their heads. How did they maintain stability without the looming threat of force? Perhaps it was a testament to a society that prioritized cooperation over confrontation. As we continue to unearth the secrets of this enigmatic civilization, one thing is clear. The Indus Valley was a society that thrived on innovation and practicality. It was a world where the real power lay not in bronze swords, but in the quiet, steady flow of water through carefully constructed channels. And while their script may remain a locked book for now, their legacy is an open one, inviting us to delve deeper into the mysteries of a people who chose to build a civilization on the foundations of cleanliness and trade. Stay tuned, because as we dig further, there's more to unravel in this ancient puzzle. The Indus Valley may have been forgotten by the sands of time, but its echoes still resonate, challenging us to see beyond the written word and into the heart of a civilization that left its mark without leaving a clear trace. As we wrap up our deep dive into the mysterious Indus Valley, let's set our sights eastward to another ancient powerhouse, China during the Shang dynasty, starting around 1600 BCE. Now, when you think of ancient China, images of serene landscapes, wise philosophers, and noodles come to mind. But let's veer off the beaten path and dive into the gritty realities of this formidable era, a time when metallurgy was the name of the game, and the world was more interconnected than a network of ancient Snapchat streaks. The Shang dynasty wasn't just a time of pretty pottery and philosophical musings. It was an era of bronze, baby. We're talking about an innovation that was so revolutionary it practically kicked off the Bronze Age in China. The Shang folks were bronze casting wizards. Imagine the ancient equivalent of Silicon Valley tech giants. But instead of apps, they were crafting elaborate vessels and weapons. These weren't just any old metal trinkets. They were status symbols, religious artifacts, and tools of power. Think of them as the original bling, but with a side of military might. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. The process of bronze casting was a complex dance of chemistry and craftsmanship. It involved creating molds out of clay or wax, filling them with molten bronze, a copper-tin alloy, and letting it cool. This wasn't a hobbyist project. It required a network of skilled artisans and a hefty supply chain of raw materials. Copper and tin had to be sourced and transported across long distances, hinting at trade routes that were as ambitious as they were extensive. These routes were the precursors to the famed Silk Road, laying the groundwork for a trade network that would eventually stretch halfway across the globe. Now, while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion that ancient China was a hermit kingdom. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The Shang dynasty was plugged into an intricate web of trade and communication. Archaeological finds, like cowrie shells and jade from far-flung regions, suggest the Shang people were no strangers to international commerce. They traded silk, the ancient world's equivalent of haute couture, long before the Silk Road became a household name. Imagine a caravan of traders, laden with silk and spices, journeying across the rugged terrains of Central Asia. It's like the original luxury goods trade, minus the Instagram influencers. Speaking of cultural treasures, let's talk about oracle bones. These weren't mystical artifacts for some arcane rituals. Instead, they were more like ancient post-it notes, used for divination, sure, but also for recording everything from harvest predictions to military campaigns. Picture this. A king consults a turtle shell or an arc scapula, asking whether to invade a neighboring territory. The bone is heated until it cracks, and a diviner interprets the resulting patterns. It's like an early form of data analysis, with a side of pyromania. But these inscriptions are crucial. They provide some of the earliest examples of Chinese writing, giving us a direct line into the minds of the Shang rulers. Now, let's debunk the myth that Shang kings were benevolent philosopher-king types. In reality, they were more like ancient CEOs, wielding power with an iron fist, or in this case, a bronze one. Their rule was backed by a strong military, with chariots that were the ancient equivalent of high-speed tanks. The Shang military was no ragtag band of warriors. It was a highly organized force, ready to defend the dynasty's interests at the drop of a bronze helmet. And those oracle bones, they often recorded decisions about war, not philosophical musings. It was less Confucius and more Game of Thrones. Economically, the Shang dynasty was a powerhouse driven by agriculture and metallurgy. The fertile lands along the Yellow River provided abundant harvests of millet and wheat, feeding a population that could rival any modern metropolis. They didn't just grow crops. They farmed like it was their full-time job, because it was. This agricultural surplus was the lifeblood of the Shang economy, supporting a complex society where artisans and merchants thrived. And just like today, Economic prosperity was closely tied to social stability. When the harvest was bountiful, the kingdom flourished. When it failed, well, let's just say the oracle bones got a workout. The political landscape of the Shang dynasty was as intricate as a bronze filigree. The king sat at the top of the hierarchy, supported by a network of nobles and bureaucrats who managed the sprawling territories. These local leaders were like regional managers, ensuring the king's decrees were followed and tax revenues flowed. The Shang capital, Yin, was a bustling hub of political power and cultural exchange, a place where ideas and innovations mingled like guests at a dynastic gala. But all was not rosy in Shangland. The dynasty's reliance on divination and ancestor worship sometimes led to power struggles and internal conflict. Kings were believed to communicate with their ancestors for guidance, but when the messages got mixed, it could spell trouble. It was like playing telephone with the afterlife. Sometimes the message that came through wasn't quite what was intended. As we leave the Shang dynasty in our historical rearview mirror, remember that this was a civilization that thrived on innovation and connectivity. It was a world where bronze wasn't just a metal, but a medium of power and prestige. And while the oracle bones may have been cracked, the legacy of the Shang is anything but. So as we continue our journey through the annals of ancient history, keep an eye on the horizon, because there's always another story waiting to be unearthed. Stay tuned for more tales from the past, where the echoes of history still resonate, reminding us that even in ancient times, the world was a complex and interconnected web. And with the Shang dynasty's legacy of bronze bling and oracle bones behind us, let's sail across the Aegean Sea to the land of olives, toga parties, and the birthplace of democracy itself, ancient Greece, circa 800 BCE. Cue the philosophical musings and epic tales of heroism, right? Well, hold your horses, or chariots in this case, because the real story of Greece is a bit more nuanced than toga-clad philosophers lounging around discussing existentialism. First off, let's tackle the big D word, democracy. Athens, the poster child for democratic ideals, was less of a utopian free-for-all and more like an exclusive club with a steep entry fee, citizenship. Of a population of roughly 300,000 in the 5th century BCE, only about 30,000 were actually considered citizens. That's a mere 10% who got to participate in the civic life of Athens. Women, slaves, and foreigners, who made up the bulk of the population, were about as likely to get a vote as a modern-day teenager is to win a Nobel Prize. So, while Athenian democracy was groundbreaking, it was also highly selective, more like a gated community with a very specific dress code. Economically, Greece was a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own rules, currency, and trade networks. Athens, for instance, was a powerhouse of commerce, thanks to its strategic location by the sea and its bustling port of Piraeus. Ships laden with olive oil, wine, and pottery set sail, making Athens the Amazon prime of the ancient world. But this commercial success wasn't just about savvy business acumen. It was also about the hard work of countless slaves who did the heavy lifting, literally. They worked in the silver mines of Laurium, which funded Athens' naval dominance, allowing the city to flex its maritime muscles like a bodybuilder at the gym. Now, let's talk about the philosophical heavyweights, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. While they might be the poster boys of ancient Greek thought, their ideas didn't just float around in some academic bubble. These philosophers were deeply engaged with the practicalities of their time, wrestling with questions of ethics, governance, and the nature of reality. Socrates, for instance, was the ultimate gadfly, challenging Athenians to think critically and question their assumptions, an attitude that eventually got him a one-way ticket to a hemlock cocktail party. His student Plato, in turn, envisioned a society led by philosopher kings, while Aristotle became a walking encyclopedia, categorizing everything from politics to biology with the meticulousness of a tax auditor. And then there's the Olympic Games, the original reality show of the ancient world. Far from the commercialized spectacle we know today, the original Olympics were a mix of athletics and diplomacy. They began in 776 BCE in Olympia, a small town in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Athletes came from all over the Greek world to compete in events like running, wrestling, and chariot racing. But it wasn't just about the glory of sport. These games were a diplomatic tool, a chance for city-states to show off their best and brightest, make alliances, and settle disputes without resorting to war. Think of it as the United Nations, with more discus throwing and fewer PowerPoint presentations. But let's bust a myth while we're at it. The Olympics weren't a peaceful utopia where everyone held hands and sang Kumbaya. The games were exclusive. Only freeborn Greek men could compete, and the stakes were high. Winning an event earned you fame, honor, a lifetime supply of olive oil, while losing was an exercise in public humiliation. The athletes trained like modern pros, with strict diets and rigorous regimens, because failure didn't just mean personal disappointment. It could bring shame upon their entire city-state. Now, as we wrap up our whirlwind tour of ancient Greece, let's take a moment to consider the legacy of this civilization that has shaped so much of the modern world. From democracy to philosophy, the Greeks laid the groundwork for countless institutions and cultural practices that endure today. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality of ancient Greece was a complex tapestry of innovation and inequality, brilliance and brutality. It was a world where the pursuit of knowledge coexisted with the harsh realities of politics and economics. The Greeks' influence on modern institutions is undeniable. The architecture of democracy, the foundations of Western philosophy, and the Olympic spirit all trace their roots back to this ancient civilization. The architectural wonders of the Parthenon and the philosophical inquiries of the Republic provide enduring blueprints for societies worldwide. Yet, for all the philosophical debates and artistic achievements, the Greeks were also a people who understood the gritty pragmatism of survival in a world that was often as brutal as it was beautiful. So, as we step back from the sunlit shores of ancient Greece, let's remember that history is not a simple tale of heroes and ideals. It's a complex narrative of real people navigating the challenges of their time, much like we do today. The ancient Greeks, with all their contradictions and complexities, remind us that the past is not just a place of distant echoes, but a mirror reflecting the enduring questions and struggles of the human condition. And with that, our journey through the ancient world comes to a close, leaving us with a richer understanding of the civilizations that paved the way for the world as we know it. In the grand theater of history, where emperors and empires fought for the spotlight, there was another show quietly stealing the scene, the ancient economy. It was the unseen hand that shaped societies, a bit like how your coffee addiction shapes your mornings. Let's start with the Silk Road, the antique equivalent of Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day delivery, but with a lot more camels. The Silk Road wasn't just one trail. It was an intricate web of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles, from the bustling markets of Xi'an, China, all the way to the Mediterranean. Imagine that as the original World Wide Web, but instead of fiber optics, it was powered by the steady clap of hooves and the creak of wooden wheels. And unlike your Wi-Fi, it didn't drop out during important moments, unless you count bandit attacks or sandstorms. This wasn't just a road for peddling overpriced spices and silk that felt as luxurious as a Netflix binge on a lazy weekend. It was the lifeline of ancient economies. Silk was the headliner, sure, but the supporting cast included gold, silver, precious stones, and even the occasional elephant, providing the kind of exotic flair that would make even the most extravagant influencer blush. By the 2nd century BCE, silk alone was being traded in Rome for its weight in gold. Yes, you heard that right, actual gold. The Romans had a penchant for luxury, and silk was the ultimate status symbol, much like owning the latest iPhone today. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of silk robes and fine fabrics. The reality was a little less glamorous. Trade on the Silk Road was no walk in the park. It was more like a grueling marathon through the world's toughest terrains. Traders faced blistering deserts, treacherous mountains, and of course, the odd highway robber who thought your luxury goods would look better in his caravan. The journey could take months, no quick jaunts here, and merchants had to be as savvy as they were brave, navigating not only geography, but also complex trade networks and fluctuating political landscapes. And while we're busting myths, let's talk currency. If you've ever thought that ancient money was all about jingling coins, think again. Sure, coins were part of the story, but so were goods like silk, which often served as a currency itself. In some regions, the silk was literally worth its weight in gold. a fact that had Roman senators wringing their togas over the drain on their coffers. By 14C, Roman historian Pliny the Elder was lamenting that 100 million sesterces were spent annually on Eastern luxuries, some that would make any finance minister clutch their pearls. The Silk Road was a corridor of cultural exchange as well as commerce. Ideas traveled along with goods, and philosophies hitchhiked their way across continents. Buddhism made its way from India to China, changing the spiritual landscape along the way. It's like a cultural buffet where everyone got a taste of different philosophies and ideas, long before globalization was even a twinkle in humanity's eye. Yet, the Silk Road was not a place of endless prosperity. It was more of a high-risk, high-reward venture. The costs were high, both in terms of goods and human lives. Many traders never made it back to tell their tales, falling victim to the perils of the journey. And while the Silk Road was a melting pot of cultures, it was also a hotbed of tension. Different empires eyed each other's wealth with suspicion, and alliances could shift as quickly as a sand dune in a desert windstorm. Despite these challenges, the Silk Road endured for centuries, a testament to humanity's relentless pursuit of trade and connection. It was the artery through which the lifeblood of ancient economies flowed, a complex network that was as vital as it was vulnerable. So next time you click Add to Cart, spare a thought for the merchants of the Silk Road who paved the way for today's global marketplace, one silk thread at a time. In the end, the Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was an ancient superhighway of commerce, culture, and collaboration, a symbol of the interconnectedness of civilizations long before the digital age. It was proof that, even in antiquity, people were willing to go to great lengths to trade a bit of silk for a lot of gold. And perhaps, in that relentless quest for connection and commerce, we find a little bit of ourselves. But let's shift our gaze from the dusty trails of trade to the gilded halls of power, where emperors and kings played chess with entire continents. The political landscapes of ancient empires were a swirling cauldron of ambition, betrayal, and occasional comedy, like Game of Thrones, but with more sandals and fewer dragons. Remember, the stakes were just as high, only instead of a digital throne, they were vying for actual thrones, with very real consequences for getting it wrong. Take, for instance, the Treaty of Kadesh, inked in 1259 BCE between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses Roman II and the Hittite king Hattusili Roman III. This was one of history's earliest recorded peace treaties, and it came after both sides had spent a good amount of time trying to clobber each other into oblivion. Imagine your typical family squabble, but on a geopolitical scale, complete with chariots and sharp objects. The treaty was essentially a mutual, let's not murder each other anymore pact. Ramses and Hattusili agreed to share intelligence and return political refugees, an ancient precursor to modern diplomatic relations, albeit without the photo ops and handshakes. This was a time when information traveled at the speed of a well-fed camel, so having a reliable ally was worth its weight in gold, or in this case, papyrus. And let's not forget the absurdity of royal decrees. Kings and emperors loved issuing proclamations that often made one wonder if they were more about flexing power than practical governance. Take the Persian King Darius I, who reigned from 522 to 486 BCE. He was a master of logistics, creating a network of roads that would make a Roman proud, and implementing a postal system that was the envy of the ancient world. But he also had a taste for grandiosity. Darius once commissioned a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, a project that took years and countless laborers to complete. It was a logistical feat, sure, but one that likely had his advisors whispering, "Is this really necessary?" Now, if you think modern political marriages are complex, ancient ones were a whole different ballgame. These unions were less about love and more about securing alliances. Though that could make Thanksgiving dinners less awkward, it did add layers of complexity to international relations. Consider Cleopatra Roman VII of Egypt, who famously aligned herself with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. Her liaisons were strategic, designed to bolster Egypt's position against the looming threat of Roman expansion. Cleopatra wasn't just playing the game, she was rewriting the rules. Despite the romanticized image of her as a temptress with a flair for eyeliner, Cleopatra was a shrewd political operator, fluent in multiple languages and well-versed in the art of survival. Managing these vast empires was no small feat, especially when your communication network was slower than a sloth on a Sunday. Messages were carried by messengers who traveled on foot, horseback, or by ship, depending on the terrain and urgency. It could take weeks, even months, for a message to reach its destination. Imagine running a country where your latest orders might not be executed until well after the crisis has passed. It's a bit like trying to steer a ship using carrier pigeons, frustrating and not terribly effective. Then there were the power plays that would make even the most seasoned politicians raise an eyebrow. The infamous Roman Emperor Caligula, who reigned from 37 to 41 CE, is a prime example. Known for his eccentricity and cruelty, he reportedly declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea, instructing his soldiers to attack the ocean and gather seashells as spoils of war. It's a story that's hard to verify, but perfectly illustrates how power can sometimes go to one's head, resulting in orders that defy both logic and sanity. Amidst all this political theatre, the logistics of empire building were a constant headache. Rulers had to balance the needs of their people with the ever-present threat of invasion, all while keeping their sprawling territories in check. Consider the Roman Empire at its height, stretching from Britain to Egypt. The Romans were masters of infrastructure, building roads, aqueducts, and cities that connected their empire like the ancient world's version of a superhighway. But maintaining such a vast empire required a delicate dance of military might, savvy diplomacy, and a bit of luck. Yet, for all their grandeur, ancient empires were built on a foundation of human labor, often unpaid and unwilling. The construction of the Great Wall of China, for instance, demanded the sweat and lives of countless laborers. It was a monumental feat of engineering, but the human cost was staggering, a reminder that the glories of empire often came with a steep price tag. So, as we marvel at the political machinations of ancient times, let's not forget the people behind the scenes, the messengers, the builders, the soldiers, whose lives were intertwined with the whims of their rulers. The political landscapes of ancient empires were a tapestry of ambition, power, and sometimes absurdity, a reminder that while the players and stakes may change, the game of politics remains a timeless human endeavor. In summary, ancient political landscapes were as tangled and vivid as any modern narrative, filled with treaties that forged peace and marriages that sealed fates. They remind us that while the past may seem distant, the echoes of human ambition and folly are just as relevant today. And as we ponder these ancient intrigues, there's plenty more to uncover, so stay tuned for more tales from the annals of history. Now, let's peel back the velvet curtain of ancient history and get to know the real stars of the show, the ordinary folks whose daily grind made the empires tick. Forget the glamour of silk traders or the drama of emperors. We're diving into the gritty, unfiltered reality of life for the average Roman or Greek citizen. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all toga parties and philosophical debates. First stop, the Roman Empire, where hygiene was, let's call it, aspirational. The Romans were big fans of public baths, a kind of social hub that doubled as a place to scrub off the grime of the day. Imagine your gym's locker room, but with more marble and fewer headphones. These baths were open to everyone, for a small fee, and served as the ancient version of a water cooler, where gossip flowed as freely as the heated water. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was more splash and chat than spa day. Hygiene was a mixed bag, with bathers sharing facilities with hundreds, if not thousands of others. The water quality, questionable at best. If you're picturing pristine pools, think again. The clean was relative, and Roman bathhouses were often a breeding ground for germs, not unlike a modern-day subway during flu season. But the real kicker in Roman hygiene was their ingenious yet horrifying sewer system. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, was both a marvel of engineering and a nightmare for anyone living nearby. It efficiently whisked waste away from the city, but let's just say it didn't always do so odorlessly. Rome was home to about 1 million people at its peak, and the logistics of waste management in such a dense population were as complex as a modern city's traffic during rush hour. Those grand marble toilets, communal. Yep, privacy was a luxury, and people did their business shoulder to shoulder, chatting away. It was the epitome of the phrase, close quarters. Heading over to Greece, life wasn't all Socratic dialogues and athletic prowess. The Greek city-states, particularly Athens, get a lot of love for their democratic innovations. And sure, they were ahead of their time, if you happened to be a free male citizen. For everyone else, the democratic dream was more of a distant reality. Women, slaves, and foreigners, often the majority of the population, were excluded from the political process. Athenian democracy was an exclusive club with about 30,000 citizens out of an estimated population of 250,000. Not exactly open access, huh? Despite the limitations, Athens did introduce some fascinating ideas. Citizens could speak at the assembly, propose laws, and vote, creating a sense of civic duty that was revolutionary for its time. It wasn't just lip service. Public participation was expected. If you didn't engage in politics, you were labeled an idiot, the origin of the modern word idiot, though back then it simply meant a private person disengaged from public affairs. So next time someone calls you an idiot, just remind them it's historically accurate if you're not into politics. Now, let's shatter the myth of the noble peasant, that rustic hero serenely tending fields under a golden sun. Reality check. Life for peasants was brutal and backbreaking. Agricultural workers, who made up the vast majority of ancient populations, toiled from dawn till dusk. They were the backbone of the economy, growing the grain that fed cities and armies alike. But their lives were often a series of grueling tasks and endless toil. Subsistence farming was the name of the game, and one bad harvest could spell disaster. Forget about weekends or holidays. Every day was a workday, and leisure was a rare luxury. In the Roman Empire, peasants had the added joy of paying taxes, which could be as high as 1/3 of their produce. Imagine working all year only to hand over a substantial portion of your hard-earned crops to the authorities. It's no wonder that peasant revolts were a recurring theme in history. The strain of constant labor, combined with societal pressures, made for a precarious existence. And while the image of the self-sufficient peasant living in harmony with nature is appealing, the truth was often a harsh struggle for survival, with little room for romantic notions. Living conditions were, unsurprisingly, less than ideal for most. In Rome, the majority of the populace lived in insulae, or apartment buildings, that were basically fire traps stacked several stories high. These structures were prone to collapse and fires, thanks to their shoddy construction and the open flames used for cooking and heating. Privacy was non-existent, and noise was a constant companion. If you've ever complained about thin walls, imagine hearing your neighbors not just arguing, but also cooking, cleaning, and everything in between. Despite these challenges, ordinary people kept the wheels of ancient societies turning. They were the ones who built the roads, grew the food, and filled the ranks of armies. Their stories, often overshadowed by the grand narratives of history, reveal the resilience and fortitude required to endure in a world without modern conveniences. So next time you grumble about your commute, or the Wi-Fi acting up, spare a thought for the ancient laborers who paved the roads of Rome, or the Athenian citizens who shaped democracy with their bare hands. As we delve deeper into the lives of ordinary ancient folk, we'll uncover more about their social structures, customs, and the economic realities that shaped their world. There's plenty more to explore in the annals of history, so stay tuned for more insights and stories from the past that are as rich and complex as the people who lived them. As we journey through history's tapestry, it's time to swap out the everyday toil for the clang of swords and the dust of ancient battlefields. Let's unmask the legends of valor that have been polished to a sheen by time and romanticism, and get down to the nitty-gritty reality of ancient warfare. War stories are often glorified tales of heroism and strategy, but much like your grandparents' stories of walking uphill both ways to school, the truth is a bit more nuanced. First, let's tackle the myth of the noble warrior, that fearless gladiator charging into battle with a gleaming sword and an unwavering resolve. Reality check. Most ancient battles were less about individual valor and more about sheer chaos. The romanticized image of neatly lined ranks clashing with precision is largely a Hollywood concoction. In truth, these battles were often messy, disorganized, and terrifyingly brutal. For the average soldier, it was less about heroics and more about surviving the day without a spear through the gut. Take the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE, famously depicted in movies as 300 Spartans holding off a massive Persian army. While it makes for great cinema, the real story is a bit different. Yes, there were around 300 Spartans, but they were joined by thousands of other Greek allies who tend to get lost in the retelling. It was a desperate, albeit strategically smart, stand in a narrow pass, but not the lone heroic last stand as often portrayed. Herodotus records that the Persian forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands, although modern estimates peg it a still formidable 70,000 to 300,000. The Greeks faced near certain doom and used the terrain to their advantage, making it less about individual bravery and more about smart military tactics. Now, let's talk economics because, believe it or not, war is expensive, and not just in terms of human life. The costs often drain treasuries faster than a teenager's shopping spree. The Peloponnesian War, a protracted conflict between Athens and Sparta from 431 to 404 BCE, is a prime example. Athens, with its formidable navy, initially held the upper hand, but the cost was staggering. The war stretched over nearly 3 decades, exhausting the coffers of both city-states. By the time Sparta emerged victorious, Greece was left battered and economically crippled. Think of it like burning through your savings for a decade-long party that leaves you with nothing but a massive hangover and an empty wallet. Military blunders were not in short supply either. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who famously marched his elephants over the Alps during the Second Punic War, is often hailed for his audacity and tactical brilliance. Yet the campaign also serves as a cautionary tale. Hannibal's decision to invade Italy was bold, but sustaining his army over years in enemy territory was a logistical nightmare. While he won several battles, he lacked the resources to capture Rome itself. His campaign drained Carthage's resources and ultimately led to its downfall. It's a classic example of overreaching, a theme as old as time. For a glimpse into the mind of ancient military leaders, we have the works of Sun Tzu, the Chinese general and military strategist who penned The Art of War around the 5th century BCE. His emphasis on strategy over sheer force is summed up neatly with his famous assertion: the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Yet, while his insights are celebrated, the reality for most soldiers was far from artful. They were caught in the meat grinder of conflict, where survival often depended on luck as much as skill. And let's not forget the unintended consequences of warfare, disease being a major one. The cramped conditions of military camps were breeding grounds for illness, with more soldiers often dying from disease than battle wounds. The Antonine Plague, which struck the Roman Empire from 165 to 180 CE, is estimated to have killed up to 5 million people, a catastrophic blow to Roman military and economic strength. The human cost of war went beyond the battlefield. Entire generations were lost, economies were destabilized, and the aftermath often involved a painful rebuilding process. The sacking of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 CE, for instance, was a psychological blow to the Roman Empire, signaling a decline that would culminate in the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, had been part of the Roman military as foederati, allied troops, but discontent over mistreatment prompted their rebellion. The sacking was less about plunder and more about survival and desperation, as these warriors sought to secure land and resources. Despite the myths of gallant knights and noble warriors, the gritty truth of ancient warfare is one of struggle, survival, and a hefty price paid in both blood and treasure. As we peel back the layers of legend, we find a more complex and sobering reality, one that reminds us of the enduring costs of conflict. The romanticism of battle may have its appeal, but the echo of swords clashing in the past serves as a stark reminder of the harsh realities faced by those who lived and died by the sword. The next chapter of our historical journey will continue to unravel the complex tapestry of ancient times, exploring the intersections of culture, economy, and human endeavor. The stories are as rich as they are varied, each thread revealing a piece of the grand mosaic of our shared past. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the annals of history, where each revelation brings us closer to understanding the intricate dance of civilization. So, as we delve deeper into the annals of history, we find ourselves faced with a curious paradox. The very same ancient civilizations that brought us glorious tales of heroism and grandeur also left behind some of the most mundane, yet profoundly impactful, legacies. Let's talk about legal systems, for example. When you think of the roots of our modern laws, you might conjure up images of powdered wigs and parchment scrolls, but the truth is much older and sometimes messier. Take the Code of Hammurabi, dating back to around 1754 BCE in ancient Babylon. This wasn't just a list of rules. It was an early attempt to bring order to chaos, to take the unpredictability of human behavior and pin it down with a chisel on stone. This code encompassed everything from property rights to family law, and even set the stage for the idea of presumption of innocence, a concept that still echoes in today's courtrooms. But let's not romanticize it too much. It was also famously harsh, with the whole an eye for an eye approach that might seem a tad excessive if you're used to settling disputes with a stern email. Fast forward to ancient Rome, and we find the 12 Tables, the foundation of Roman law that emerged around 450 BCE. This was the legal equivalent of putting all your cards on the table, literally. The laws were inscribed on 12 bronze tablets, displayed publicly so that every Roman citizen, at least in theory, knew the rules of the game. This transparency was revolutionary, laying the groundwork for the concept of a legal system accessible to all. However, it wasn't all courtroom drama and fair trials. These laws were often skewed in favor of the wealthy and powerful, proving that, even in antiquity, the scales of justice didn't always balance perfectly. Now, let's pivot to architecture, because if there's one thing the ancients loved more than a good legal system, it was a colossal building project. The Romans were practically the original overachievers when it came to construction. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE, stands as a testament to their architectural prowess and penchant for grandiosity. This arena could seat up to 50,000 spectators, all ready to witness gladiatorial matches that were the ancient equivalent of today's reality TV, but with a lot more blood and fewer commercial breaks. And while the Colosseum is awe-inspiring, let's not forget that it was built using slave labor, a grim reminder that the glories of Rome often came at a steep human cost. The Egyptians, of course, took architectural ambition to a whole different level with their pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza, completed around 2560 BCE, was a wonder of engineering for its time, towering at 481 feet. It remained the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. Yet, behind the facade of these monumental tombs lies the reality of the labor force that built them. The romantic image of a free workforce laboring under the sun for the glory of the pharaoh is more myth than fact. These were arduous projects, carried out by thousands of laborers who toiled in harsh conditions, likely driven more by necessity than devotion. As we reflect on these ancient achievements, it's clear that our fascination with history often glosses over the less glamorous truths. We admire the grandeur of the Colosseum without pondering the lives of those who sweat and bled to bring it to life. We celebrate the wisdom of the Code of Hammurabi while sidestepping the harsh penalties it imposed. It's this duality, the allure of myth and the weight of reality, that keeps us tethered to these stories. So, why do these ancient tales continue to captivate us? Perhaps it's because they offer a mirror to our own world. The complexities of ancient societies remind us that, for all our technological advancements, the core challenges of human existence remain surprisingly consistent. We still grapple with issues of justice, equity, and power. We remain enthralled by epic stories of triumph and tragedy, even as we navigate the everyday grind of modern life. But there's a crucial lesson here that echoes through the ages: the importance of learning from the past to avoid repeating its mistakes. The fall of Rome, with its overextended borders and economic mismanagement, serves as a cautionary tale for empires throughout history. The environmental degradation that plagued ancient Mesopotamia, contributing to its decline, is a stark reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and ecological sustainability. And let's not forget the human cost. The stories of those who built the pyramids, fought in the arenas, and toiled in fields are as vital as the grand narratives of kings and conquerors. They remind us that history isn't just the story of great men and monumental events, but also a tapestry woven from countless individual threads. As we wrap up this journey through ancient history, let's carry forward the lessons these tales offer. In the end, The legacy of ancient civilizations isn't just their monumental achievements or their grandiose failures. It's the enduring reminder of human resilience, creativity, and folly, a testament to our shared past and a guide for navigating the future. So, the next time you marvel at a piece of ancient architecture or ponder an age-old lore, remember the stories of those who came before us. They're not just tales of yore. They're the echoes of humanity's eternal dance through time, reminding us that while the players and stages may change, the essence of the play remains timeless. If you ever fancied yourself an ancient astronaut theorist, here's a reality check. The pyramids were built by humans, not little green men. That's right, those gargantuan stone structures weren't the result of interstellar contractors, but rather a testament to human ingenuity, sweat, and maybe a dash of pharaoh-induced coercion. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the only thing more impressive than the pyramids is the logistics behind their construction. Let's kick things off with the Great Pyramid of Giza, arguably the most iconic of the lot. Standing at a proud 6 meters, well, at least until erosion shaved off a couple of meters, this colossal structure was built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2580-2560 BC. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, let's clear up a common misconception. Slaves didn't build the pyramids. No, that particular Hollywood cliché can stay on the cutting room floor. Instead, a workforce of skilled laborers, who might have been more akin to contracted workers than shackled slaves, put in the hard yards. And by hard yards, we're talking about hauling over 3 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons. Imagine that workout routine. Now, let's talk money, honey. Building the Great Pyramid was no small feat, and it certainly wasn't cheap. Limestone, the primary building material, was sourced from local quarries, with the finer, higher-quality stone transported from Tura, about 12 miles away. The logistics of moving these behemoth blocks, picture a combination of sledges, manpower, and maybe even a trickle of Nile water to reduce friction. A bit of ancient ingenuity that makes modern supply chains look like a cakewalk. The price tag on all this? Well, historical records are a bit fuzzy, but estimates suggest the cost could have equated to billions by today's standards. Talk about a hefty bill for a tomb. In terms of manpower, the workforce is estimated to have ranged between 20,000 to 30,000 workers, with some historians arguing it could have been as high as 100,000 during peak construction times. This wasn't just a bunch of folks digging holes and stacking rocks, though. We're talking about a well-oiled machine of engineers, architects, laborers, and support staff. Yes, support staff, because even in the ancient world, someone had to cook the bread and brew the beer. And oh, did they brew beer? It was the hydration of choice, offering refreshment and calories in one frothy package. Move over Gatorade, ancient Egypt had its own sports drink. But how did these folks get paid? Forget wallets. We're talking about an economy of barter and goods. Workers received rations of food, beer, and textiles. No direct deposit here, just a daily bread allotment and a pint of the local brew. This was an investment in human capital, ensuring the workforce remained fed, hydrated, and motivated. Pharaohs knew that an army marches on its stomach, and apparently so does a construction crew. The idea that aliens swoop down with tractor beams and anti-gravity technology is tantalizing, but the reality is that ancient Egyptians were just that good. They employed a level of organization and efficiency that might make a modern project manager blush. From seasonal rotations of labor to precise mathematical calculations, they essentially transformed the Nile's flood cycles into a natural time clock, aligning construction phases with the ebb and flow of the river. It's like Mother Nature was the subcontractor they never had to pay. And let's not forget the social and political backdrop. Building pyramids wasn't just about leaving a mark on the landscape. It was a statement of power, a declaration of divine right. Pharaohs weren't merely rulers, they were seen as gods on earth. The pyramids, they were both a stairway to heaven and a PR stunt of epic proportions, ensuring that Khufu's legacy was literally set in stone. It was a time when the line between religion and state was as blurred as the desert horizon. In essence, the pyramids were the ultimate vanity project, but they were also a marvel of engineering, economics, and human ambition. While the myth of alien involvement adds a layer of sci-fi drama, the real story is even more compelling. It's about human beings pushing the boundaries of what's possible, using nothing but their wits, sweat, and maybe a little bit of divine inspiration, or at least divine pressure from their pharaoh. So next time you gaze at a picture of the pyramids, remember, it's not just a pile of rocks. It's history's greatest DIY project, assembled by the original kings of construction. So, from the towering tombs of Egypt, we take a Mediterranean cruise to a land where democracy was the new black, ancient Greece. But before we start imagining Socrates flipping burgers at a toga party, let's get one thing straight. Athenian democracy wasn't exactly the bastion of freedom we like to think it was. If you were picturing a utopia of intellectual debates and philosophical enlightenment, you might need to adjust your toga. Let's start with the basics. Around 508 BC, Athens decided to give this democracy thing a whirl under the guidance of a chap named Cleisthenes. But don't be fooled by the fancy title. Democracy back then was about as inclusive as an exclusive club with a very selective bouncer. Only male citizens could vote, which meant women, slaves, and foreigners were about as politically empowered as a rock. And by citizens, we're talking roughly 30,000 out of a population of over 300,000. So it was more a case of by the few for the few. Now, on to the peculiar traditions that made Athenian politics the reality TV of its day. Ever heard of ostracism? No, it's not a New Age wellness retreat. This was Athens' method of political cleansing, a kind of ancient popularity contest with a dark twist. Every year, citizens would write the name of a politician they wanted to exile on a shard of pottery. If a name popped up enough, that person was banished for 10 years. It was like Survivor, but instead of getting voted off the island, you got voted out of the city. And while it sounds harsh, let's face it, a 10-year holiday might not be the worst thing in the world. But what about the cost of running this democratic show? Votes might not have come with price tags, but political influence certainly did. The wealthier citizens, especially those holding the purse strings of the navy or military, wielded significant power. Funding public projects or celebrations was a chance to show off your wealth and curry favor, a bit like modern-day campaign donations, but with more wine and less official paperwork. The economy of favors and influence was alive and well, and the more drachmas you had, the more strings you could pull. And just to keep things spicy, let's talk about political spin. Forget modern media moguls. Ancient Greece had its own brand of spin doctors. Orators and sophists were the influencers of their time, crafting speeches that could sway public opinion faster than you can say Plato. These silver-tongued devils were less about facts and more about persuasion, turning the assembly into a verbal battlefield where the sharpest tongue usually won. In fact, some things never change, right? Now, before you start thinking this was all doom and gloom, there was a certain charm to the Athenian system. The idea that ordinary citizens could participate in governance was revolutionary. The assembly, where citizens gathered to debate and decide on legislation, was a lively affair. Picture a bustling open-air theater with impassioned speeches, jeers, and maybe a few fistfights. It was democracy in its rawest form, where public speaking was as much a blood sport as a means of persuasion. However, the Athenian experiment with democracy was as much about control as it was about freedom. The state often used religion and fear to maintain order, with oracles and omens playing a significant role in political decisions. The Delphic oracle, for example, was basically the CNN of its time, offering predictions that could make or break political careers. It was a world where the line between divine will and human action was as blurry as a politician's promise. Let's not forget the economy that underpinned all this politicking. Athens' wealth was built on trade, silver mines, and yes, a bit of good old-fashioned conquest. The Delian League, initially a coalition of Greek city-states, soon became Athens' personal empire, with tributes flowing in like a steady stream of gold. This wealth funded everything from public festivals to massive building projects, ensuring that the Athenian brand of democracy was as much about power projection as it was about popular participation. In the end, Athenian democracy was a magnificent contradiction, a beacon of political innovation and a reflection of human flaws. It was a system that celebrated debate but feared dissent, that honored the voice of the people while silencing many of them. Like any good drama, It was filled with heroes and villains, visionaries and charlatans. And while it wasn't perfect, it was a bold experiment that left an indelible mark on history. As we weigh the myths against the realities, it's clear that Athens was as much about the art of politics as it was about the politics of art. So the next time you hear someone waxing poetic about the glory of ancient democracy, just remember, it wasn't all philosophical symposiums and Socratic dialogues. Sometimes it was just as messy and muddled as the political arenas we navigate today. And that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating. And just as Athens was wrestling with democracy, let's hop over to Rome, where the entertainment was a tad more visceral. You know, the kind that involved swords, sand, and a lot of blood. Welcome to the world of the gladiators, where Hollywood's sepia-toned heroes clash with the gritty reality of history. Forget the noble warriors portrayed by the likes of Russell Crowe. In the Roman Colosseum, the truth was far less glamorous and far more brutal. First things first, let's debunk the myth of the voluntary gladiator. Sure, a handful of free citizens did choose to enter the arena, drawn by promises of fame, fortune, or maybe just a midlife crisis. But the vast majority of gladiators, they were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to fight for their lives. This wasn't a career choice. It was a desperate fight for survival. Imagine being snatched from your homeland, shackled, and thrown into a training school where your life expectancy was about as stable as a Roman emperor's reign. Not exactly the kind of job you dream about as a kid. Now, let's talk Turkey, or rather, denarii. The Colosseum wasn't just a hub of spectacle. It was an economic powerhouse. Construction of this behemoth began under Emperor Vespasian around 72 AD and was completed under his son, Titus, in 80 AD. Built to accommodate 50,000 spectators, the Colosseum was the stadium of its day, and entry was surprisingly accessible. The Roman government, keen on keeping the masses entertained and distracted, often subsidized or even provided free entry to the games. Why? Because nothing says, please don't revolt, like a good old-fashioned gladiatorial fight. The costs of maintaining such grandiose spectacles were astronomical. Gladiators had to be fed, housed, and trained, all on the state's dime, or rather, the emperor's. Yet these events were a public relations goldmine. The emperors used them to curry favor with the populace, a strategy famously dubbed bread and circuses by the satirist Juvenal. By ensuring the people were entertained and fed, the rulers kept the social unrest at bay, much like a modern politician might use social media to keep their approval ratings up. Speaking of economics, the games weren't just a financial drain. They were also a lucrative business for those involved in organizing them. Lannisti, or gladiator trainers, were akin to modern-day sports agents, scouting for talent and managing their fighters. They invested heavily in their human assets, hoping to profit from their victories, or at the very least, sell them for a handsome sum if they survived long enough. It's a tough business when your merchandise tends to expire prematurely, but hey, those were the risks they were willing to take for a piece of the pie. And let's not forget the spectacle itself. The Colosseum was as much about the show as it was about the fights. Elaborate stage sets, exotic animals, and even mock naval battles were part of the package deal. The Romans weren't messing around. They wanted their audiences to be awed, shocked, and utterly captivated. This wasn't just a fight to the death. It was a theatrical production, complete with all the bells and whistles. Think Broadway with more blood and fewer dance numbers. Now, why did these bloody spectacles hold such appeal? For the Romans, gladiatorial games were not just entertainment, but a display of power, both of the state and the individual. Watching a gladiator fight was akin to witnessing the strength and brutality that had built the Roman Empire. It was a reminder of Rome's military prowess and the emperor's ability to control life and death. Plus, let's face it, humans have always harbored a morbid curiosity for violence. The Colosseum was the ultimate reality TV, raw, unfiltered, and deadly. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Philosophers like Seneca, and even some early Christians, criticized the games for their brutality and moral depravity. Yet, these voices were often drowned out by the roar of the crowd and the clashing of weapons. The allure of the games was simply too strong, a testament to the darker side of human nature that revels in the spectacle of conflict. And in a twisted way, the gladiatorial games were a great equalizer. In the arena, A slave could become a hero, and a hero could become a legend. Victorious gladiators gained fame and adulation, sometimes even their freedom. It was a brutal meritocracy where skill and courage could transcend social status, albeit with a very bloody price tag. As we peel back the layers of myth and romanticism, the reality of the Roman gladiator becomes clear. They were pawns in a much larger game of power and spectacle, their lives used to entertain and pacify the masses. Yet, within this harsh reality lies a story of resilience and human spirit, of individuals fighting against all odds for a chance at survival, and perhaps a taste of freedom. It's a tale as old as time, one of struggle and ambition, played out on the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum. And so, as we stand in the shadow of this ancient amphitheater, we are reminded of the complexities and contradictions of human history. The Colosseum was a stage for both the grandest of spectacles and the darkest of human instincts. It was a place where myth and reality intertwined, leaving a legacy that still captivates us today. But fear not, dear listener, we're not finished with our Roman Odyssey just yet. There's more to explore in this empire of contradictions, where the grandeur of its monuments often mask the gritty reality of everyday life. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tangled web of history, one story at a time. And as we leave the spectacle of Roman swords and sandals behind, let's pivot eastward to a quieter yet equally transformative arena, the paper revolution of the Han Dynasty in ancient China. Now, I know what you're thinking. Paper? Really? But stick with me, because while it might not be as flashy as gladiatorial games, paper was the ultimate game changer. Forget the sword. This was the pen's time to shine. Picture this. It's 105 AD, and Kai Lun, a court official, has just whipped up a new concoction that would make even the savviest of tech entrepreneurs envious. Using a blend of mulberry bark, hemp, rags, and fishnets, he created a writing material that was cheaper, more flexible, and far more accessible than the cumbersome bamboo slips and silk previously used. It wasn't just an invention. It was a revolution that would reshape communication, governance, and yes, bureaucracy. Let's start with the basics. Before paper, recording anything meant dealing with bamboo slips that were as handy as a brick for jotting down your shopping list. Imagine trying to carry around a few dozen of those just to write a letter. Silk was an option, but it was about as affordable as today's high-end designer labels. Enter paper, a lightweight, cost-effective solution that opened the floodgates of literacy and record-keeping like never before. So, what did this mean for the Han Dynasty? A sprawling empire with an appetite for administration that would put even the most fastidious of office managers to shame. Well, for starters, it meant a boom in documentation. And when I say boom, I mean an avalanche of scrolls, reports, and memos that made the Great Wall look like a garden fence. The Han bureaucracy was a machine, and paper was the oil that kept it running smoothly. Of course, with great power comes great paperwork. The early bureaucrats were like kids in a candy store, scribbling away their decrees and edicts as if the very act of writing could manifest their will into reality. They documented everything from tax records to criminal proceedings with a fervor that would make any modern-day accountant weep tears of joy, or perhaps horror. Forget spreadsheets. This was the original data overload. But let's not get carried away by the romance of it all. The very efficiency that paper brought to governance also meant that the Han Dynasty could tighten its grip on its subjects. Taxes were collected with renewed zeal, laws were enforced with newfound precision. In a way, paper was both liberator and oppressor, a tool of enlightenment and control. It was the double-edged sword of its time, minus the literal bloodshed. Economically, paper revolution was as significant as any technological leap. With paper production centered in the bustling city of Loyang, the industry became a linchpin of the local economy. Jobs were created in manufacturing, trade routes expanded, and the demand for literacy grew. Suddenly, being able to read and write wasn't just a privilege for the elite. It was a ticket to social mobility. Talk about a career upgrade. And what about the myth of the bureaucrat as hero? The notion that these early administrators were noble stewards of civilization is appealing, but let's not kid ourselves. Many were just as prone to corruption and inefficiency as any modern-day official. The Han Dynasty had its fair share of office scandals, and paper trails often led to intrigue and power plays worthy of a political thriller. Some things, it seems, truly never change. In the grand tapestry of history, paper might seem like a humble thread, but its impact was anything but modest. It democratized knowledge, fueled an administrative juggernaut, and set the stage for centuries of cultural and technological advancement. The Han Dynasty's paper revolution was nothing short of a paradigm shift, a quiet yet profound transformation that would echo through the ages. So, as we marvel at the ingenuity of Kai Lun and his fellow pioneers, let's remember that sometimes the most ordinary of inventions can have the most extraordinary impact. In a world where swords clashed and empires rose and fell, it was the simple stroke of a brush on paper that truly reshaped the landscape. And as we continue our journey through the annals of history, one thing is clear. The pen, or in this case, the brush, is indeed mightier than the sword. But hold your horses, because we're not done yet. The Han Dynasty's legacy extends far beyond paper and bureaucracy. From the bustling Silk Road to the intricate art of silk weaving, there's much more to explore in this fascinating era. So stay tuned as we unravel the next chapter of history's great tapestry, one story at a time. As the Han Dynasty quietly weaves the threads of its intricate legacy, let's embark on a journey to a civilization that often plays the underdog in the grand historical narrative, the Indus Valley Civilization. Nestled between the Indus River and its tributaries, this ancient society flourished around 3,300 to 1,300 BCE, cunningly crafting a world that would make even modern urban planners sit up and take notes. Yet, despite their impressive achievements, the Indus Valley folks remain the mysterious introverts of ancient history, silent, complex, and slightly elusive. Now, when we think of ancient cities, we usually picture dusty roads, haphazard constructions, and the occasional open sewer. But Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, two of the major cities in the Indus Valley, were ahead of their time. Imagine this: organized grid layouts, standardized fired brick construction, and wait for it, indoor plumbing. That's right, folks. While some modern cities are still figuring out how to handle a rainy day without turning into Venice, the Indus Valley people had already mastered drainage systems that could put ours to shame. Their streets boasted covered drains, and their houses included private baths. Sure, these were not your high-tech, self-cleaning toilets, but they were still leaps ahead of the ancient restroom game. In a world where neighbors were still thinking in terms of chamber pots and ditches, the Indus Valley was already flushing forward. Economically, the Indus Valley was no slouch either. They were savvy traders, exchanging goods like beads, metals, and pottery with distant lands. The reach of their trade networks stretched as far as Mesopotamia, evidence that they were not just isolated farmers, but active participants in the bustling commerce of the ancient world. They used weight systems more precise than a Swiss watch and seals that doubled as personal branding tools. Picture a Bronze Age business card, stamped with intricate motifs and symbols. These folks knew how to make an impression long before LinkedIn. Yet, here's the kicker: we know so little about them. Their script, found on thousands of seals and pottery shards, remains undeciphered, leaving us with more questions than answers. It's the ancient equivalent of finding a locked diary, filled with tantalizing secrets, but written in an unbreakable code. The lack of grandiose monuments and palatial ruins adds to the enigma. Unlike their Egyptian and Mesopotamian counterparts, who left behind towering legacies, the Indus Valley people seemed less interested in big, flashy displays of power. Maybe they preferred efficiency and practicality over dramatic flair. Or perhaps they were simply too busy perfecting urban sanitation to bother with oversized tombstones. The absence of overtly hierarchical structures in their society is another head-scratcher. Unlike the rigid class systems observed in other ancient civilizations, there's scant evidence of kings or priestly elites ruling the roost. This suggests a society where power was possibly more decentralized, a tantalizing mystery that challenges our understanding of ancient governance. It's like discovering a corporate office without a CEO. How did they keep everything running smoothly? Then there's the enigma of their decline. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization began to fade away. Climate change, tectonic shifts, and maybe a touch of overfarming have all been tossed around as potential culprits. Yet, despite these theories, the precise reasons for their disappearance remain as murky as the waters they so expertly tamed. It's a historical whodunit without a definitive suspect. If only they had left behind a neatly penned memo detailing their exit strategy. But alas, we're left to ponder the clues like detectives on a cold case. So, why does this sophisticated civilization remain shrouded in mystery? Part of the answer lies in the lack of a deciphered written record, which means we're trying to piece together their story from fragments and whispers. But it also highlights a broader issue with historical narratives, the tendency to focus on loud, flashy civilizations while overlooking the quieter, yet equally influential, societies. The Indus Valley people might not have built colossal pyramids or waged epic wars, but they laid the groundwork for urban living and trade networks that stretched across continents. Their legacy, though subtle, is profound. In wrapping up our whirlwind tour through ancient history, let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of the past. The Indus Valley civilization, with its forward-thinking urban designs and enigmatic existence, reminds us that history is not just about the loudest voices or the grandest monuments. It's also about the quiet innovators, the meticulous planners, and the societies that thrived and vanished, leaving behind a trail of intrigue and inspiration. As we turn the final page on this chapter of history's book, we're left with the realization that the past is as multifaceted as the present. Each civilization, whether grand or modest, contributes to the rich tapestry of human experience. So next time you flush a toilet or navigate a city grid, spare a thought for those ancient minds who paved the way. In the end, history isn't just what happened. It's the stories we uncover and the mysteries we continue to explore. And as we continue to dig deeper, we find that the true legacy of these ancient societies lies not just in their accomplishments, but in the questions they leave behind for us to ponder. In the grand soap opera of human history, the rise and fall of civilizations plays out like a never-ending season of Survivor, except with more sand, fewer bikinis, and significantly higher stakes. One scene-stealer in this ancient drama is Mesopotamia, often hailed as the cradle of civilization, though its legacy is more like a precarious Jenga tower than a sturdy crib. This is where humanity first decided that living in muddy huts next to a river was preferable to wandering aimlessly in search of mammoth burgers. Mesopotamia, snugly situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, saw its fair share of floods, a reminder from nature that water is both a life-giver and a party crasher. One particularly memorable deluge inspired the epic of Gilgamesh, a story that makes Noah's Ark sound like a leisurely cruise. This tale, dating back to around 2100 BCE, recounts how the gods, in classic overreaction, sent a flood to wipe out humanity because people were too noisy. Imagine being so annoyed with your neighbors that you decide to drown the entire neighborhood. Utnapishtim, the story's protagonist, builds a boat to save all species, long before it became a trope. While this epic serves as a thrilling myth, it also reveals a kernel of truth. Mesopotamians were well acquainted with flood-induced chaos, and their cities often resembled Venice, minus the gondolas and overpriced gelato. Moving west, let's talk pyramids. These towering tombs are often romanticized as the ultimate architectural feat of ancient Egypt, but the truth is less glamorous. Constructed between 2580 and 2560 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Giza was basically the world's most over-the-top retirement plan for Pharaoh Khufu. Sure, it's an engineering marvel, but let's not forget that it was built on the backs of thousands of laborers who probably didn't sign up for this gig on their own volition. The romantic notion of slaves building pyramids has been debunked. Many were likely skilled workers, but let's be clear, they weren't exactly working for stock options or a killer dental plan. While the Egyptians were busy stacking rocks, the Greeks were experimenting with a form of government that would go on to influence democracy as we know it. Spoiler alert, it was more exclusive than a VIP club in downtown Athens. Only free male citizens could vote, leaving women, slaves, and foreigners to twiddle their thumbs while the men decided on important matters like war, laws, and whether to add more olives to the salad. This system, emerging around the 5th century BCE, may have been groundbreaking, but it was also as rigged as a game show where the host's cousin always wins the car. The famous Athenian democracy, despite its flaws, paved the way for political systems where, theoretically, every voice could be heard. Unless, of course, you were one of the many who didn't get a microphone. In the grand tapestry of history, these ancient civilizations remind us that progress often comes with a hefty price tag, and the past isn't as golden as it seems. Whether it's dealing with divine tantrums, building monuments for the afterlife, or figuring out who gets a say in governance, these societies laid the groundwork, sometimes literally, for the world we know today. And while it's tempting to get swept up in the romance of ancient myths and legends, the reality is often a little grittier and a lot more human. Now, if you think ancient civilizations only had to deal with divine floods or pyramid schemes, wait until you hear about the fiscal circus that was the Roman economy. Picture a financial system so tangled it'd make your accountant break out in hives. At its peak around 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, a vast territory that needed more than just legions of soldiers to keep the peace. It needed cash, and lots of it. Enter Roman taxation, a system as beloved as a root canal without anesthesia. Taxes were collected in all sorts of forms, from grain to coins, and if you think filling out a 1040 form is bad, try doing it in a toga and with the risk of losing your farm if you got it wrong. Speaking of coins, let's talk inflation. Rome had an insatiable appetite for luxuries and military conquests, and paying for these wasn't cheap. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, started out strong, but was soon devalued faster than you can say economic collapse. By the 3rd century AD, the silver content in a denarius had plummeted from 95% to a paltry 5%. This wasn't just a numbers game. It was a recipe for disaster. Prices soared, and the economy reeled in a way that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader reach for a stiff drink. In an attempt to stabilize the ship, Emperor Diocletian introduced the edict on maximum prices in 301 AD, a price control measure that reads like the Roman Empire's own version of a grocery store loyalty program gone wrong. The idea was to cap prices and wages to curb inflation, but enforcing it across an empire was like trying to herd cats across the Mediterranean. Merchants skirted the law, the black market thrived, and the edict eventually fizzled out like a cheap Roman candle. While Rome's economy was busy playing with fire, the empire's trade networks were the true unsung heroes. These routes connected the known world, making silk and spices the Bitcoin of their day. The Silk Road, a vast network of trade routes stretching over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, was a bustling highway of commerce and culture. Silk was the ultimate status symbol, a luxury so exquisite that even Roman senators couldn't resist its allure. In fact, senators were banned from wearing silk because it was considered too decadent, and if that doesn't scream fashion police, I don't know what does. Spices were another hot commodity, quite literally. Pepper was worth its weight in gold, and considering Romans loved to sprinkle it on everything from peacock to porridge, it was a lucrative trade indeed. These goods flowed into Rome like a river of gold, but it wasn't a one-way street. Roman exports included wine, glassware, and olive oil, the latter being so essential that amphorae, the ceramic jars used for transport, were the ancient equivalent of shipping containers, just less likely to end up as trendy apartment decor. But hold on, it wasn't all smooth sailing on these trade routes. Pirates and bandits were the original highwaymen, turning the Mediterranean into a watery version of the Wild West. The Roman navy had its hands full keeping these marauders at bay, ensuring that goods reached their destinations, and that Rome's coffers stayed full. It's a testament to human ingenuity and greed that, despite the risks, trade flourished like never before. And then there's the matter of barter, the no-cash-necessary approach to commerce that was as appealing to tax evaders then as it is now. In the countryside, where Roman coins were as rare as a sunny day in a British winter, bartering was the norm. Farmers traded grain for tools, wine for cloth, and so forth, creating a web of transactions that slipped under the taxman's radar. It was practical, yes, but it also meant assessing the value of goods in a way that could make bartering more like haggling at a flea market than a simple swap meet. So, while the Roman economy was a marvel of its time, it was also a cautionary tale. Its grandeur masked systemic flaws that would eventually contribute to the empire's decline. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still plenty of ground to cover in this epic saga. As Rome's economy teetered on the edge, its political and social landscape was undergoing seismic shifts. setting the stage for even more drama. But for now, let's leave our toga-clad financiers to wrestle with their fiscal headaches, while we prepare to delve deeper into the ancient world's most intriguing stories. As the toga-clad financiers struggled with their fiscal headaches, let's pivot to the political theatrics that unfolded under the ancient sky. Time to unravel the chessboard where kings were less grandmasters and more like pawns in a cosmic game. Our first stop, the Chinese dynasties, where politics wasn't just a blood sport, it often required a literal bloodline. Take the Han Dynasty, which ruled from 206 BCE to 220 CE. Think of it as the ancient version of a long-running TV series, complete with plot twists, betrayals, and a cast of characters that would put any soap opera to shame. At its zenith, the Han Dynasty controlled a vast empire stretching over 3 million square miles, a testament to political savvy and a dash of ruthlessness. The emperors of Han were seen as the sons of heaven, which sounds like a celestial title, but came with earthly headaches. You see, ruling an empire wasn't about sitting on a throne and looking regal. It was about navigating a web of court intrigue that could rival any modern-day political scandal. The aristocrats and eunuchs weren't just innocent bystanders. They were key players in a power game that could make or break an emperor. Take Emperor Wu, who reigned from 141 to 87 BCE. His reign was a masterclass in expansionist policies, yet it was his ability to manage the internal court drama that kept him on top. Wu's court was a hotbed of intrigue, as officials jockeyed for power like contestants on The Bachelor, except the roses were positions of influence, and the eliminations were far more permanent. But it wasn't all cloak and dagger. The Han Dynasty also laid the groundwork for modern governance with its civil service exams, a system so sensible that you can almost forgive the dynastic squabbles. The exams aim to create a merit-based bureaucracy, a system that sounds progressive until you realize it was still largely a boys' club, with women relegated to the sidelines, or worse, used as pawns in marriage alliances. Switch continents, and you'll find a political landscape that was just as complex, but involved more feathers and less bureaucracy. Enter the Aztec Empire, a civilization that flourished in what is now central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th century. The Aztec political system was an intricate dance of power and spectacle, with rulers who could make the most seasoned showman look like an amateur. The Aztecs were ruled by the Huey Tlatoni, a title as impressive as it sounds, translating to Great Speaker. But don't let the name fool you. This was no democratic gig. The Great Speaker wielded power like a maestro, conducting a symphony of human and divine forces. Moctezuma Roman II, who reigned from 1502 to 1520, epitomized this role. His reign was marked by expansion and consolidation, but also by the infamous Spanish arrival that would eventually topple the empire like a house of cards. The Aztecs operated a political puppetry as complex as any dynasty, with city-states ruled by puppet kings who paid homage to the Great Speaker. Their allegiance was secured through a blend of intimidation and religious fervor, with the Aztec calendar dictating rituals that would make even the most devout practitioners of modern faiths raise an eyebrow. Human sacrifice, often portrayed as barbaric, was in fact a political tool as much as a religious rite. It was all about reinforcing the divine mandate of the rulers, a gruesome yet effective strategy to keep the population in line. This wasn't just about appeasing the gods. It was about maintaining control in a society where power was as fleeting as a solar eclipse. Meanwhile, back in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Byzantine Empire was busy proving that political intrigue was a global pastime. This bastard child of Rome, which lasted from 330 to 1453 CE, was a hotbed of palace coups and religious conflicts that could make Game of Thrones look like a Sunday picnic. Byzantine politics was a Byzantine affair, no pun intended, where emperors were often as disposable as yesterday's news. Take Emperor Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE. His ambitious reign saw the empire reach its territorial zenith, yet his court was a den of vipers where allegiances shifted like desert sands. Justinian's most famous move was the construction of the Hagia Sophia, a marvel of architecture that stood as a testament to imperial grandeur. Yet, It was his legal reforms, the corpus juris civilis, that had a lasting impact, setting the stage for modern legal systems. But even Justinian wasn't immune to the political backstabbing that characterized his reign, as the infamous Nika riots of 532 CE nearly cost him his throne. Everywhere you look in the ancient world, politics was a volatile cocktail of ambition, strategy, and a dash of divine right. Rulers were often depicted in statues as demigods, but peel back the marble facade, and you find human beings grappling with the same insecurities and ambitions we see today. They held empires together with claims of divine favor and the occasional application of brute force, a combination that assured them a place in history, if not in the hearts of their subjects. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of ancient political landscapes, one thing becomes clear. Power was never as straightforward as the history books might suggest. Whether it was the celestial mandate of Chinese emperors, the divine spectacle of Aztec rule, or the Byzantine game of thrones, these leaders played a high-stakes game where the only certainty was uncertainty itself. So, for those who think politics today is a mess, just remember, history was doing it long before it was cool. It's a reminder that while styles may change, the substance of human ambition remains timeless. Buckle up, because we've still got plenty more ground to cover in our journey through the ancient world's most intriguing stories. So, while rulers were playing high-stakes games with thrones and crowns, let's zoom in on the folks who were more concerned with keeping their heads down and their bellies full. Welcome to the world of the average Joe, or Julius, if we're sticking with ancient Rome, where life was far less about divine mandates and more about surviving another day without being flattened by a runaway chariot. Starting in Sparta, let's unravel the notorious education system, the agoge. If you thought gym class was tough, imagine a regime where your morning starts not with a whistle, but a war cry. Spartan boys were plucked from their homes at the tender age of 7 and tossed into a whirlwind of discipline and deprivation that made modern boot camps look like summer retreats with complimentary massages. By the way, if you're picturing a young Spartan with a lollipop, think again. These kids were trained to endure hunger, pain, and the occasional bear hug from a hulking instructor. The agoge was less about reading and writing, and more about turning boys into warriors with abs like marble statues and hearts as hard as their shields. But before you idolize the ancient cross-fit routine, here's the kicker. The whole setup was a social engineering project designed to maintain Spartan supremacy through sheer muscle and fear. In a society where the elite were outnumbered by helots, think of them as semi-enslaved laborers who did all the actual work. The agoge was like an insurance policy against rebellion. The system was as rigid as a Roman aqueduct, but it kept the social order afloat, even if it meant turning childhood into a survival reality show. Now, leap forward in time and across the continent to medieval Europe, where being a peasant was about as glamorous as a mud pie. Life as a serf wasn't just back-breaking, it was soul-crushing. Picture this. You're bound to the land like a medieval app on a feudal lord's smartphone, toiling from dawn till dusk in exchange for a measly portion of the harvest. Your life revolved around the seasons, which dictated when you sowed, reaped, and prayed for the plague to pass you by like a bad cold. If you were lucky, you might attend a fair or hear a traveling minstrel, but mostly you were stuck in a cycle as predictable as the sunrise. Speaking of predictability, the medieval social structure was a tiered cake of oppression. At the top you had the king, who ruled by divine right, and below him a descending hierarchy of nobility, each with their own slice of power and privilege. The peasants, meanwhile, were like the crumbs, essential yet overlooked. Yet, amid the muck and mire, there was a strange sort of stability. Everyone knew their place, and while upward mobility was as rare as a dragon sighting, the system was remarkably resilient, surviving centuries of change and upheaval. Now, back to those Romans. If you think the Spartans and medieval peasants had it tough, let's talk about the day-to-day life of a Roman plebeian. In a city teeming with over 1 million souls, these commoners lived in insulae, or apartment blocks, that made today's cramped studios look palatial. With 5 to 6 stories and no elevators, ascending to your top floor flat was a feat worthy of a triumphal march. Except instead of laurel wreaths, you were rewarded with leaky roofs and the risk of a swift collapse. And speaking of risks, let's not forget the ever-present threat of fire, which turned many a Roman neighborhood into an impromptu bonfire. But life wasn't all doom and gloom. The Roman plebs had their distractions: gladiator games, chariot races, and public baths, where you could unwind after a long day of avoiding falling masonry. Bread and circuses, as the saying goes, kept the populace entertained and fed, a clever ploy by the emperors to keep dissent at bay while they played their own games of political chess. It was a thin veneer of contentment that masked the underlying tensions of a society teetering on the precipice of chaos. And while we're on the topic of hidden tensions, let's not overlook the role of women in these ancient societies. In Sparta, women were expected to be as tough as their male counterparts, managing the household and controlling the family purse strings while the men were off playing soldier. Meanwhile, in Rome, women wielded influence in subtler ways, maneuvering through the social labyrinth with a mix of charm, wit, and occasionally a well-timed scandal. The Vestal Virgins, for instance, held a sacred role that came with privileges and responsibilities that would make any modern CEO raise an eyebrow. In medieval Europe, women faced a different set of challenges. Their lives were dictated by the church and the whims of their male relatives. Yet within these constraints, they found ways to exert agency, whether through managing estates, like Helena of Aquitaine, or patronizing the arts and education. These women were the unsung architects of their time, shaping the culture and politics of their world from behind the scenes. As we peel back the layers of these ancient societies, one thing becomes clear. Life was a balancing act between survival and aspiration. Whether you were a Spartan youth dreaming of glory, a Roman pleb navigating the crowded streets, or a medieval peasant praying for a good harvest, the struggle was real, and it was shared. These stories remind us that, while the trappings of power and privilege were reserved for the few, the grit and resilience of the many laid the foundations for civilizations that, despite their flaws, pushed humanity forward. But hold on, we're not quite done yet. There's more to explore in this grand tapestry of human history, and the stories of those who lived on the margins are just as compelling as those of the emperors and kings. So, stay tuned as we continue our journey through the ages, peeling back the layers of myth and legend to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of life in the ancient world. After all, history is more than just dates and battles. It's the story of us, in all our messy, magnificent glory. As we continue our journey through the ages, peeling back the layers of myth and legend to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of life in the ancient world, let's set our sights on Troy, the ancient city that's become a symbol of epic romance and tragic downfall. But spoiler alert, the fall of Troy might be more grounded in gritty reality than in the poetic verses of Homer. The Iliad, that cornerstone of Western literature, paints the fall of Troy as a grand saga of gods and heroes, love and betrayal. You've got your Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and your Achilles, the original rock star with a killer heel. The whole dramatic shebang makes for great storytelling, but the historical facts are a bit less glamorous. Archaeological evidence suggests that Troy was indeed a bustling trade hub around 1300 BCE, but its destruction was likely due to a more mundane cause: earthquakes, fires, or a combination of both, rather than a decade-long siege featuring wooden horses as ancient Trojan malware. Troy, located in present-day Turkey, was strategically perched near the Dardanelles, a key trade route. This made it a tempting target for conquest, not because of Helen's beauty, but because controlling Troy meant controlling trade. And trade, as we've learned, was the lifeblood of ancient economies. The real Trojan War might have been less about love and more about loot, with Greek city-states vying for economic dominance in the region. So, while Homer spun a tale of divine intervention and heroic deeds, the truth is that Troy's fall boils down to good old-fashioned greed and geopolitical maneuvering. Ah, the human story, always finding a way to make economics sound like an opera. Now, let's shift our gaze to Athens, that beacon of ancient wisdom and democracy. The so-called Golden Age of Athens, roughly spanning from 480 to 404 BCE, is often celebrated as a time of unprecedented cultural achievement. We're talking about the Parthenon, Socratic dialogues, and a democracy that supposedly set the stage for all modern political systems. But before we cue the choir of angels, let's take a closer look at the fine print. First off, Athenian democracy wasn't exactly the inclusive utopia it's often cracked up to be. It was more of a members-only club, and the bouncer had a strict policy. Only free male citizens of Athenian descent could join. That meant women, slaves, and foreigners, who made up the majority of the population, were left out in the political cold. So, while Pericles was busy giving speeches about the virtues of democracy, most Athenians were about as politically empowered as a rock. And speaking of Pericles, his ambitious building projects, like the Parthenon, weren't just about celebrating the gods or the glory of Athens. They were also a massive employment scheme, designed to keep the city's economy humming and its restless citizens occupied. The funds for these grand works came largely from the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states ostensibly united against Persian aggression. In reality, Athens treated the League like its personal piggy bank, leading to tensions that eventually sparked the Peloponnesian War. So much for unity and harmony. While we're at it, let's debunk the myth of Athenian enlightenment. Sure, Athens was a hub of intellectual activity, but it was also a place where philosophers like Socrates could be sentenced to death for supposedly corrupting the youth. The lesson here: even in a city hailed as the cradle of Western thought, dissent had a funny way of being silenced, permanently. But before we get too cynical, let's acknowledge the allure of these myths. The stories of Troy and Athens captivate us because they tap into universal themes: love, power, and the eternal quest for glory. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the events themselves. These tales, woven into the fabric of our cultural consciousness, offer both inspiration and cautionary lessons. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of ancient history, it's clear that the past is a complex tapestry of myth and reality, intertwined in ways that are both surprising and enlightening. The stories of Troy and Athens, Mesopotamia and Rome, the Chinese dynasties and Aztec empires, all these narratives remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a reflection of human nature in all its messy, magnificent glory. In the end, the legacy of these ancient civilizations is not just in their monumental achievements or their spectacular collapses. It's in the way they challenge us to question our assumptions, to look beyond the surface, and to seek out the deeper truths hidden in the shadows of time. So, the next time you hear tales of heroes and gods, of golden ages and epic battles, remember to take them with a grain of salt, and maybe a dash of skepticism. After all, the real story of history is the one that lies beneath the myth, in the gritty details of human endeavor and aspiration. And that, dear listeners, is a tale worth telling. In the grand theater of human evolution, sleep has always been the backstage diva, demanding a perfect balance of mystery and necessity. Yet, if you think the ancient world had it all figured out with their pyramids and philosophies, just wait until you hear about their sleep habits. The Egyptians, for instance, who gave us everything from hieroglyphics to mummification, decided that resting their weary heads on stone pillows was the ultimate comfort. Yes, stone. Maybe they thought waking up with a neck cramp was the secret to eternal life. In reality, those stone pillows were more about practicality than comfort, keeping critters out of their ears rather than cradling their dreams. Now, the Greeks, with their penchant for drama and democracy, approached sleep like an audition for the next big tragedy. They placed great stock in dreams, seeing them as messages from the gods. Dream oracles were the ancient equivalent of a 1-800 psychic hotline, except instead of a phone bill, you'd be sacrificing a goat or two. Temples like that of Asclepius at Epidaurus became dream hotels where people checked in hoping to catch a divine hint about their future. No Wi-Fi, but plenty of incense and mysticism. And then come the Romans, those practical engineers of empire, who took a more utilitarian approach. Their sleep practices were influenced heavily by social class. The wealthy would luxuriate on sumptuous beds, sometimes in rooms dedicated solely to sleep, a concept that feels suspiciously modern. Meanwhile, the lower classes often made do with whatever space they could find, be it a corner of the tavern or a cramped apartment shared with their extended family. Privacy, an indulgence for the rich. The economic realities of the time dictated the size of your bed and who you shared it with. Roman soldiers, for example, often slept in large barracks, side by side with their comrades. It was a real bonding experience. Nothing says camaraderie like snoring in unison. But don't picture too much discomfort. Soldiers were considered vital assets, and even the infamous Roman efficiency ensured they got some decent shut-eye. Speaking of practicalities, let's not forget the hygiene, or lack thereof. While the Romans might have had their aqueducts and baths, personal cleanliness wasn't quite the norm across the board. Imagine drifting off to sleep on a shared straw mattress, wondering if your neighbor's lice were going to migrate over in the night. In many ways, sleep was more of a survival tactic than an act of leisure. For a society that admired the muses, Greeks certainly had a pragmatic view of snoozing. Their beds were often simple affairs, wooden frames with leather straps, and if you were lucky, a mattress stuffed with straw or wool. They understood the value of a good night's sleep, but certainly didn't obsess over thread counts or memory foam. And while they revered dreams, the day-to-day act of sleeping was largely utilitarian. In ancient Egypt, where the sun god Ra ruled the day, night was a time of mystery and danger. The Egyptians believed that dreams were a form of prophecy, a way for the gods to communicate. To get a good night's sleep, one needed not just a sturdy bed, but also a slew of amulets and spells. It was a bit like trying to sleep with one eye open, keeping a close watch on the spiritual realm. Yet even with all these precautions, sleep itself was a luxury not everyone could afford. Economic status played a big role. While the rich might have had a private chamber with elaborate decorations, the poor made do with mats on the ground. It's a tough sell. Come for the pyramids, stay for the insomnia. It's easy to romanticize these ancient practices, imagining a world where people were in tune with nature and more mindful of their rest. But the truth is, sleep has always been a bit of a gamble. Whether it was the ancient Greeks consulting the stars, or the Romans engineering their cities, sleep was influenced more by practicality and necessity than by any pursuit of comfort or health. The ancients may have laid the groundwork for civilization, but when it came to catching some Z's, they were still figuring things out just like the rest of us. Moving from the grand stage of ancient sleep habits to the backstage chaos of economics, let's pull back the curtain on how wealth dictated who got to snooze like a god and who was left counting sheep on a straw mat. In the Roman Empire, wealth wasn't just about having the finest toga or the largest collection of Greek slaves. It extended right into the bedroom, or cubicula, if you want to get fancy with Latin. For the Roman elite, sleep wasn't just a necessity. It was an art form, and their beds were the canvases. Imagine lounging on a lectus genialis, a bed so opulent it practically demanded a standing ovation from the guards every time you laid down. These beds were often crafted from exotic woods, and adorned with ivory, gold, and silk, making them the Tesla of ancient sleep technology. Meanwhile, in stark contrast, the average Roman citizen, let's call him Marcus Everman, was lucky if he had a proper bed at all. More often than not, he'd be sharing a cramped insular apartment with his extended family or even strangers. Privacy, that was a luxury reserved for the upper crust, not for the likes of Marcus, who probably had to settle for a straw-stuffed mattress if he was lucky. The disparity was as glaring as the difference between a 5-star luxury suite and a budget hostel. Now, let's talk linens. You might think that a crisp linen sheet is a basic right, but in ancient Rome, it was more of a privilege. Linen, coveted for its softness and durability, was imported from Egypt and came with a price tag that could rival a small estate. The cost of outfitting a bed with the finest linen sheets could set you back as much as 300 sestertii. To put that into perspective, a legionary soldier earned about 900 sestertii a year. So, effectively, those dreamy linen sheets could cost you a third of a soldier's annual salary, or, if you prefer, the price of a modest vineyard in the Italian countryside. Talk about golden slumbers. Currency devaluation also played a role in who got to snooze in comfort. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did its economic problems. By the 3rd century AD, inflation was rampant, and the devaluation of currency meant that basic commodities, including sleep aids like wool and linen, became harder to come by for the average citizen. The once valuable denarius was so debased that it was practically monopoly money. Imagine trying to buy a decent night's sleep when your currency is worth less than the paper it's minted on. Trade routes, the arteries of ancient economies, were both a blessing and a curse. They brought exotic goods, like Egyptian linen and Chinese silk, to those who could afford them. But for the common folk, These routes might as well have been delivering unicorns for all the good it did them. While the wealthy could import luxury sleep aids, the average Roman had to rely on local resources, straw, wool, and whatever else was readily available. It's a bit like watching your neighbor install a high-end home theater system while you're still trying to get decent reception on your rabbit ear antenna. The economic divide was stark, but it wasn't just about who had the money. It was about who had the power to shape their environment and, by extension, their sleep. The wealthy had the luxury of space and solitude, while the poor had to make do with whatever they could scrounge together. It was an empire built on efficiency and engineering, but when it came to sleep, it was every citizen for themselves. The myth of the idyllic ancient world, where everyone lived in harmony with nature and got a perfect night's sleep under the stars, is just that, a myth. The reality was far more complex and deeply rooted in the economic and social structures of the time. While the elites enjoyed their opulent beds and fragrant linens, the average citizen had to navigate the challenges of urban life, cramped spaces, and the relentless march of economic change. So, as we tuck into our memory foam mattresses and high thread count sheets, let's spare a thought for our ancient counterparts. They might not have had the modern comforts we take for granted, but they certainly understood the value of a good night's sleep, even if it was more about survival than luxury. And as we continue to explore their world, we'll find that while the stage may have been set for grandeur, the reality was often anything but. And speaking of reality checks, let's dive into how the big shots of the ancient world, like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, used sleep not just as a way to recharge their bodies, but as a strategic tool to bolster their power. That's right, sleep was more than just sweet dreams for these guys. It was a power move, a PR tool, and sometimes a weapon. Starting with Julius Caesar, the man who practically wrote the book on political theater. Caesar's napping habits were so legendary that they could have filled a tabloid or two. In a world where catching 40 winks was often seen as a sign of laziness or weakness, Caesar flipped the script. He was famous for napping in the middle of the day, a practice that allowed him to work longer hours and appear tireless to his peers. It wasn't just about rest. It was about reinforcing his image as a leader who was always on the ball, even if that meant catching a snooze between Senate meetings. His naps were strategic, allowing him to be both alert and approachable, a rare combination in Roman politics. Then there's Alexander the Great, whose insomnia was practically the stuff of legends. According to historical accounts, Alexander was known to sleep very little, catching just a few hours here and there. And yet, he managed to conquer half the known world before most of us would have finished our morning coffee. His sleeplessness was spun into a narrative of relentless ambition and divine inspiration, suggesting he was so driven by his destiny that sleep was merely an afterthought. But let's not romanticize it too much. There's a fine line between divine sleeplessness and cranky exhaustion. Still, the image stuck, and it was a brilliant piece of ancient PR. It made Alexander seem superhuman, literally too busy conquering to bother with something as mundane as sleep. These leaders understood the power of perception. In a world where image was everything, they used sleep, or the lack thereof, as a way to craft their public personas. Caesar's calculated naps made him seem both human and superhuman, while Alexander's insomnia painted him as a man on a mission, too driven to rest. In both cases, the reality was probably a combination of necessity and strategy, with a hefty dose of ancient spin. But let's peel back the layers of myth here. This idea of the powerful insomniac, the leader who's too busy changing the world to catch a full night's sleep, is as much a product of clever storytelling as it is of reality. In truth, even the most ambitious conquerors needed rest. Lack of sleep can lead to all sorts of problems, from poor decision-making to outright hallucinations. So while the image of the sleepless leader is tantalizing, it's also a bit of a fairy tale. Yet, this myth has enduring appeal. It taps into the romantic notion that greatness requires sacrifice, and that sleep is a luxury for those without grand ambitions. It's a narrative that has persisted through the centuries, from Caesar and Alexander to modern-day CEOs who brag about functioning on 4 hours of sleep. But the reality is that humans need sleep, even the great ones, and even the ones who like to pretend they don't. There's also a social dimension to consider. In the ancient world, how and where you slept spoke volumes about your status and power. Leaders like Caesar and Alexander could afford to make statements with their sleep habits because they operated at the top of the pyramid. They had the luxury of choosing how their sleep, or lack thereof, was perceived. For the average Roman or Greek, sleep was less about image and more about getting through the day without collapsing from exhaustion. The political use of sleep wasn't limited to the ancients. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find similar stories in different guises. Napoleon Bonaparte, for instance, was said to operate on just 4 hours of sleep a night, a claim that added to his image as a tireless military genius. Whether or not it was true, it served the same purpose, reinforcing his status as a leader unlike any other. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. While the legends are compelling, the truth is that these leaders were just as human as the rest of us. They needed sleep, and they used it strategically, not just because they were superhuman insomniacs, but because they understood the power of perception. It's a classic case of using what you've got to get what you want, and in this case, sleep, or pretending not to need much of it, was a tool as powerful as any weapon. So the next time you hear about a leader who supposedly never sleeps, take it with a grain of salt. It's likely a mix of myth and reality, a story crafted to inspire awe and admiration. And while it's tempting to buy into the narrative of the sleepless conqueror, remember that even the greatest figures of history needed to rest their eyes every now and then. In the end, the myth of the powerful insomniac is just that, a myth spun from the threads of ambition and perception and woven into the tapestry of history. As we explore further, we'll see how these stories continue to shape our understanding of leadership and power, and how the ancient world's relationship with sleep was as complex and multifaceted as the societies themselves. There's more to uncover, and plenty of myths left to debunk, so keep your eyes open, at least until the next part of our journey. As we journey further into the land of sleep and myth, let's peek behind the curtain of those legendary tales of prophetic dreams and divine interventions that have captivated imaginations for centuries. The ancients were masters of storytelling, and they spun some truly epic yarns about the power of dreams. Take Homer's Iliad, where dreams are not just wisps of imagination, but potent messages from the gods. In the world of Achilles and Hector, a dream could mean the difference between victory and defeat, life and death. The ancients believed that while you were off catching Z's, the gods were busy delivering their latest memos directly to your subconscious. But let's hold up a second. Before we start thinking of these dreams as some kind of divine WhatsApp, we need to ask, what was really going on here? The truth is, dreams were often used as convenient explanations for things that ancient folks couldn't quite wrap their heads around, like why that dodgy seafood stew from dinner was causing a turbulent night. Picture a soldier in the Trojan War, tossing and turning after a day of battle. Was his dream about a divine chariot carrying him to glory, or just his stressed-out brain trying to make sense of the chaos around him? Spoiler alert, it was probably the latter. These stories of dreams being handed down by gods were not just about divine inspiration. They were also about control and power. If you could claim that a god had visited you in a dream and told you to, say, attack at dawn, that would carry a bit more weight than just saying you had a gut feeling, was ancient PR at its finest, using the allure of the gods to validate earthly decisions. And speaking of gods, let's not forget the role of the dream interpreters, the original spin doctors. These were the folks who made a living off deciphering the cryptic messages of the night. The ancient equivalent of a modern-day talk therapist, they'd listen to your dreams and tell you what the gods might be trying to say. Of course, their interpretations often came with a hefty price tag. In a sense, dream interpreters were the ancient world's answer to a high-stakes poker game, putting your chips on the table and hoping the gods were playing a straight hand. Now, let's talk about the economics of dreaming. In ancient Greece, if you wanted to get a really good night's sleep, one where you might commune with the gods, you'd head to an Asclepieion, a healing temple where the divine and the mundane intersected. Think of it as a cross between a luxury spa and a spiritual retreat. You'd make offerings, undergo purification rituals, and then crash on a stone bed in hopes of receiving divine guidance. This wasn't free, mind you. The cost of a visit could be as steep as the temple steps, and if you wanted a prime spot, it might cost you even more. But hey, what's a few drachmas for a chat with Apollo, right? While we're on the subject of divine interventions, let's not overlook how these narratives were used to explain away some pretty unglamorous realities. Take indigestion, for instance. In a world without antacid tablets, a bout of heartburn after a feast could easily morph into a vision of celestial beings. Or consider exhaustion, a constant companion in the labor-intensive ancient world. A dream about flying could just as easily be your body's way of telling you to take a break, as it could be a missive from Zeus himself. But why were these myths so appealing? Quite simply, they offered a sense of control in a world that was anything but predictable. If you believed that your dreams were guided by the gods, then you had a direct line to the universe's customer service department. It was comforting to think that your fate was being guided by a higher power, rather than left to the whims of chance. Yet, while these stories are fascinating, they also reveal the ancient world's deep-seated anxieties. Dreams were not just a source of inspiration, they were a reflection of the hopes and fears of the time. People turned to gods and oracles because they needed answers, and dreams provided a convenient medium. Whether they revealed truths or simply offered a temporary escape, they were an integral part of the cultural fabric. In dissecting these legendary narratives, we find that the romance of prophetic dreams is often grounded in the gritty reality of everyday life. The ancients may have woven grand tales of divine interventions, but at their core, these stories were about making sense of the world around them. From the battlefields of Troy to the temples of Greece, dreams served as a bridge between the mortal and the divine. As we dig deeper into the world of ancient sleep, we see that dreams were not just whimsical flights of fancy. They were a powerful tool, used to explain the unexplainable, to justify actions, and to connect the earthly to the celestial. The myths may be enchanting, but the reality is often more complex and infinitely more human. So, as we continue our exploration, keep your eyes open for the next chapter in this saga of slumber and superstition. There's plenty more to uncover, and countless dreams yet to interpret. And so, as we drift from the myth-laden shores of ancient dreams, let's paddle our way to the present, where sleep is still the elusive mistress we've been courting for millennia. Despite our modern arsenal of sleep science, apps, and gadgets designed to coax us into the arms of Morpheus, we're still tossing and turning like restless Romans on a straw mattress. Isn't it ironic? We can measure the distance to a distant galaxy, yet a good night's sleep remains a cosmic mystery. Take a moment to consider our current sleep landscape, a bizarre intersection of ancient wisdom and modern anxiety. We're bombarded by blue light, a digital spectre haunting our dreams and disrupting our circadian rhythms, something even the most skeptical ancient Greek seer couldn't have prophesied. While our ancestors worried about divine messages and critter-free ear canals, we're plagued by notifications and the fear of missing out. It's as if we've traded the fear of divine wrath for the tyranny of the 24-hour news cycle. Yet, despite our advances, we seem to be in a perpetual state of sleep debt. Around 35% of American adults report getting less than the recommended 7 hours of sleep a night, according to the CDC. That's right, folks. A third of us are basically shuffling through life like sleep-deprived zombies, clutching our coffee cups like they are sacred relics. Talk about a modern-day plague of insomnia. The timeless allure of sleep myths, much like the siren songs of old, continues to captivate us. From the notion that certain foods can induce sleep to the belief in sleep cycles aligning with lunar phases, we're just as willing to buy into these fables as our ancestors were to consult dream oracles. Sure, sleep trackers might be the new amulets, but the core desire remains, to unlock the secrets of sleep and harness its power. And let's not forget the societal pressures that dictate our slumber or lack thereof. In an age where productivity is king, sleep has been relegated to the status of a necessary evil, a luxury for the unambitious. The ancient Romans might have viewed sleep as a practical necessity, but today it's often seen as an indulgence. We're caught in a paradox. We crave rest, but fear the judgment of being perceived as lazy. It's as if Caesar's strategic naps were a prelude to our current obsession with the power nap, rebranded for the hustle culture. But how might history judge our sleep habits? Imagine future historians sifting through the digital debris of our era, marveling at how we managed to invent artificial intelligence, yet struggled to unplug long enough to catch some Z's. They'll likely chuckle at our irony. The more sophisticated our technology, the less we seem to understand the simple act of resting. Our sleep apps, designed to soothe us into slumber, often become the very distractions that keep us awake. An ancient deity would recognize the irony in that. In a world where the quest for a perfect night's sleep is as relentless as Alexander's conquests, we're left grappling with the same questions that plagued our ancestors. How much sleep do we really need? And what price are we willing to pay to get it? The ancients had their Asclepians, and we have our sleep clinics, each a testament to our enduring struggle with the Sandman. Yet, amidst the chaos, there's a glimmer of hope. The growing recognition of sleep's importance is slowly shifting cultural attitudes. The notion that sleep is for the weak is being replaced by the understanding that sleep is, in fact, for the wise. As we continue to explore the mysteries of sleep, we might finally realize that the key to rest lies not in chasing the latest trend, but in embracing the age-old truth that sometimes the best thing we can do is simply close our eyes and let go. So, as we wrap up this journey through the annals of sleep history, let's take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry woven by our forebears. From stone pillows to sleep apps, the saga of slumber is as complex and captivating as the dreams it inspires. While the myths may change, the desire for a good night's sleep remains a universal constant, a shared thread connecting us to the ancients. In the end, whether we're dreaming of gods or grappling with gadgets, the quest for rest is a story as old as time itself. If you ever thought ancient history was all toga parties and epic battles, hold onto your laurel wreaths, because today we're diving into the surprisingly gritty world of ancient economics. Yep, we're talking about the cash, the coin, the cold hard currency, or at least the closest thing to it that people had back in the day. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all shiny gold and easy trades. Let's start with coinage, which is like the original Bitcoin, but without the blockchain and with a lot more actual weight. Coins in ancient times were more than just pretty pieces of metal. They were power, prestige, and sometimes a colossal pain in the neck. The first coins popped up around 600 BCE in Lydia, an area in what's now Turkey, and they were made from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a chunk of metal you could barely lift. Talk about a workout plan. The Lydians must have had forearms like Popeye. The Greeks, always keen on improving things, refined this system by standardizing coinage. Fast forward a century or so, and they were minting coins like drachma, which weighed about 3 grams of silver. That's roughly the weight of a paperclip, for those keeping score at home. But don't be fooled by its size. This little disc had the power to grease the wheels of ancient trade networks stretching across the Mediterranean. It's like the euro of the ancient world, only with more guards and fewer bureaucrats. But this wasn't just a Greek phenomenon. The mighty Romans, with their penchant for efficiency and empire building, took coinage to new heights, or depths, depending on how you view their economic shenanigans. Roman coins often bore the faces of emperors, kind of ancient version of Instagram, where the ruling elite could flex their power and remind everyone who's boss. The denarius was a silver coin weighing about 9 grams, and over time, like many currencies, it suffered from a little thing called inflation. By the 3rd century CE, the silver content had dwindled to a paltry 2%, basically a token gesture of silver surrounded by a whole lot of worthless metal, kind of like ordering a salad just for the croutons. Now, if you think ancient trade was just a matter of swapping a few coins for goods, think again. Enter the Silk Road, the infamous trade network that was neither a single road nor paved with silk. It's more like a chaotic, sprawling web of trade routes stretching about 7,000 kilometers from China to the Mediterranean. Traders braved treacherous terrains, from the Taklamakan Desert, where the name roughly translates to go in and you won't come out, to the icy passes of the Pamir Mountains. Not exactly your ideal holiday destination. These routes were dangerous, to say the least. Bandits, wild animals, and the occasional empire collapse were all in a day's work. Traders were essentially the Indiana Joneses of their time, minus the whip, but with a lot more bargaining. And what were they trading? Sure, silk was a hot commodity, hence the name, but the reality was more diverse. Spices, precious stones, textiles, and even ideas traveled these routes. Buddhism, for instance, made its way from India to China along this very path. Talk about a cultural exchange program. As romantic as the Silk Road sounds, it wasn't a bustling highway of commerce. Think of it more as the ancient world's version of a shipping marathon. Goods didn't travel the entire length in one go. Instead, they passed through a series of middlemen, each taking their cut. Ever wonder why a silk robe cost as much as a small village? There you go. It's like playing telephone, but instead of garbled messages, you end up with a price tag that would make even the wealthiest merchant wince. And then there was the issue of logistics. Forget GPS and cargo ships. Ancient traders relied on camels and donkeys, the real MVPs of ancient trade. A camel caravan could cover about 25 miles a day, which is roughly the distance from your couch to the fridge and back several hundred times. And let's not even talk about the paperwork, or lack thereof. No handy customs forms or shipping labels. Just a whole lot of trust, bartering, and the occasional scuffle over a misplaced bale of silk. So, the next time you order something online and it arrives a day late, remember the traders of the Silk Road. They didn't have the luxury of tracking numbers or express delivery. They had to deal with the practicalities of ancient economics, where every transaction was a risky venture, and every coin was a testament to human ingenuity. And if that doesn't make you appreciate the modern world a little more, well, I don't know what will. Now, speaking of human ingenuity, let's shift gears from the Silk Road's entrepreneurial spirit to the political circus that was the Roman Empire. If you think modern politics is a three-ring circus, ancient Rome had it beat with enough drama to make a soap opera look like a documentary. At its peak, Rome was the ultimate power player, the big cheese of the Mediterranean. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a reality TV empire, complete with backstabbing, alliances, and enough intrigue to keep a legion of historians busy. The Roman Senate, supposedly the heart of Roman politics, was less about noble discourse and more about gladiatorial verbal combat. Picture a room full of toga-clad senators, each with their own agenda, haggling over power like it was Black Friday at the Forum. These were the days when oratory skills could make or break a political career. Cicero, one of Rome's most famous orators, was like the original PR guru. His speeches could sway hearts and minds faster than you can say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. But let's not romanticize this as the golden age of democracy. The Senate was more of an exclusive club for the Roman elite, where old money and new power would clash like titans. In theory, they advised the emperor. In reality, they were often at odds, their debates resembling a dysfunctional family dinner. And speaking of emperors, they were a colorful bunch, to say the least. Take Caligula, who reportedly appointed his horse as a priest and planned to make it a consul. If you think your workplace has leadership issues, remember, at least your boss hasn't tried to promote a horse. The Roman emperors were like celebrities of their time, their every move scrutinized and gossiped about. They had the power to make or break the empire with a single decision, or a mad whim. Nero, for example, is infamous for supposedly fiddling while Rome burned, although that's more myth than reality, as fiddles didn't exist yet. He probably played a lyre, but lyring while Rome burns doesn't quite have the same ring to it. And let's talk about Julius Caesar, whose life reads like the plot of an action-packed thriller. He crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, a move as bold as it was illegal, effectively declaring war on the other factions of Rome. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, is now shorthand for making an irreversible decision. Caesar's ambition was legendary. He wanted to be a king in a republic that despised the very idea. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for him. His assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, was the ultimate office coup, orchestrated by his supposed friends, a betrayal that would make Shakespeare's depiction look like a friendly disagreement. Despite the backstabbing and power plays, the political system had its allure. The idea of Rome as a republic, a system built on laws and civic duty, was groundbreaking for its time. It was the foundation upon which Western political thought would build for centuries. Yet, the reality was a constant tug-of-war between ideals and human nature, a theme as old as time itself. Money, as always, played a crucial role in politics. Roman politicians weren't above buying votes, a practice so common it might as well have been on the syllabus of political corruption, 101. Candidates would throw lavish games and feasts, essentially bribing citizens with a good time. It's like running a campaign on a platform of free pizza and fireworks. And then there were the economic challenges. As the empire expanded, so did its expenses. Maintaining the legions, building infrastructure, and keeping the plebs content required serious cash flow. Taxation was a complex system, a bit of a nightmare for anybody without a degree in ancient accounting. Provinces were taxed, and tax collectors, often more corrupt than a barrel of rotten apples, took their cut, much to the chagrin of the local populace. The Roman economy was a beast with an insatiable appetite, and it was never just about gold and silver. Grain was the lifeblood of Rome, feeding its massive population. The grain dole, a kind of ancient welfare system, was essential to keeping the peace. Disrupt the grain supply, and you'd have a riot faster than you can say bread and circuses. Speaking of which, the phrase bread and circuses comes from the Roman practice of providing free grain and entertainment to placate the masses. It's like a government-sponsored Netflix subscription, but with more gladiators and less binge-watching. Yet, no matter how grand the spectacles or how lofty the speeches, the underlying reality was often stark. The Roman Empire was built on the backs of slaves. Slavery was integral to the economy, with millions of people living in bondage. It's a sobering reminder that the glories of Rome were not without their dark shadows. The Colosseum, that iconic symbol of Roman might, was constructed by slaves, and its spectacles were often a blood-soaked reminder of the empire's might and cruelty. And let's not forget the plebeians, the common folk who made up the majority of Rome's population. They were the ones who bore the brunt of the empire's economic shifts and political machinations. While the elite played their power games, the average Roman citizen was more concerned with survival than senatorial debates. Housing in Rome was notoriously cramped and dangerous, with insulae, essentially ancient apartment buildings, prone to collapse or catching fire. It was a tough life, far removed from the marble halls of power. So, as we peel back the layers of Roman politics, it's clear that behind the marble facades and grand titles lay a complex web of human ambition, corruption, resilience, and innovation. It's a story that resonates through the ages, a reminder that while the players and stages may change, the game remains remarkably the same. As we continue to explore the intricacies of ancient empires, remember that history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding the why and how that continue to echo in our world today. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more intrigue and adventure where that came from. And speaking of echoes, it's time to aim our historical microphones toward the sands of Egypt, where ancient society was as layered as a pharaoh's pyramid and just as complex. Now, if your mental image of Egypt involves pharaohs lounging in opulent robes while slaves toil away, prepare to have your mental hieroglyphics rewritten. The truth is more intricate, more human, and a lot less glamorous than Hollywood would have you believe. Let's start at the top with the pharaohs. Sure, they had more bling than a rapper's Instagram feed, but their lives weren't just one long series of lavish banquets. Pharaohs were seen as gods on earth, which sounds awesome until you realize that with great power comes great responsibility. Namely, keeping the gods and the people happy, a juggling act that would make any modern politician break out in a cold sweat. They were the ultimate multitaskers, overseeing everything from religious rituals to military campaigns. They were a bit like the CEOs of a divine corporation, expected to maintain cosmic order, or MAD, a concept that was as important to Egyptian society as Wi-Fi is to us today. But what about those legendary pyramids, the architectural marvels that have inspired countless conspiracy theories and even more bad puns? Well, forget the image of thousands of slaves building them under the whip's crack. Recent evidence suggests that the pyramid builders were actually skilled laborers who worked in rotating shifts, like ancient contractors with a penchant for stonework. These workers were housed in nearby villages and were well fed, consuming a diet rich in meat, bread, and beer. Yes, beer. It was the Gatorade of ancient Egypt. Talk about a workplace perk. The construction of the pyramids was undoubtedly grueling, requiring immense physical labor and precision engineering. Still, it wasn't the endless misery it's often portrayed as. These workers took pride in their craft, and their efforts were a form of devotion, both to their pharaoh and the gods. However, let's not sugarcoat it. This was backbreaking work, and life expectancy wasn't exactly a selling point. Many laborers likely bore the scars of their toil, with worn joints and weathered hands serving as a testament to their monumental achievements. Dropping down the social hierarchy ladder, we find scribes, the unsung heroes of ancient Egypt. These guys were the original data processors, keeping track of everything from grain shipments to tax records on papyrus scrolls. If you think your spreadsheet is a nightmare, imagine doing it all by hand with a reed pen. Scribes were highly respected, as literacy was a rare skill. In fact, being a scribe was a fast track to social mobility, a bit like learning to code today. They lived relatively comfortable lives, shielded from the harsher physical demands placed on other laborers. Below the scribes were the artisans and craftsmen, whose skills adorned the tombs and temples with vibrant frescoes and intricate carvings. Their work was in high demand, and they were often employed by the state or temples, which made them an important part of the economy. However, their social status was a mixed bag. While their skills were respected, they lived under the constant pressure of producing work that could withstand the scrutiny of eternity. No pressure, right? And now, we come to the backbone of the Egyptian economy, the farmers. These folks lived at the mercy of the Nile, that great river which dictated the rhythm of life with its annual floods. The Nile's inundation deposited rich silt on the fields, making agriculture possible in the otherwise arid landscape. The farmers' lives were a constant cycle of planting and harvesting, a dance with the river that fed the entire civilization. Without them, the pharaoh's coffers would be empty, and the grand temples would be little more than unfulfilled blueprints. So you might be wondering, where are the slaves in all this? Well, slaves did exist in ancient Egypt, but they weren't the cornerstone of the economy as often depicted. Many were prisoners of war or debtors, and while their lives were undoubtedly harsh, they were not the faceless mass of laborers Hollywood loves to portray. Instead, they were just one part of a complex social structure, woven together with the freeborn citizens who worked beside them. Egypt's social hierarchy was as stratified as its monuments, with each class playing a vital role in the civilization's grand tapestry. It's a setup that might feel oddly familiar, echoing into modern times. The pharaoh was the ultimate ruler, akin to a modern head of state, while the priests and officials were the bureaucrats, keeping the wheels of government turning. The artisans and craftsmen were the skilled laborers, and the farmers, well, they were the essential cogs, without which the entire machine would grind to a halt. This ancient society may seem a world apart, yet it laid the groundwork for many of the social structures we see today. From the importance of skilled labor to the role of leadership in maintaining order, the echoes of ancient Egypt resonate in our modern world. It's a reminder that while the players have changed, the game remains much the same, with each generation building on the foundations laid by those who came before. As we continue this journey through time, remember that history is not just a series of dates and events. It's a living narrative, shaped by the people who lived it, their hopes, dreams, and struggles as real as our own. And as we peel back the layers of ancient societies, we see not just the grandeur of empires, but the enduring human spirit that built them, brick by brick, dream by dream. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover as we delve deeper into the annals of history. And speaking of building brick by brick, dream by dream, let's turn our gaze to the architectural virtuosos of the ancient world, the Greeks and Romans. These civilizations were like the Steve Jobs and Elon Musk of their time, innovating not gadgets, but grand structures. We're talking about feats of engineering that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer break into a sweat. First, let's marvel at the Greeks, whose temples and theaters are the stuff of legend. Take the Parthenon, for instance. This architectural wonder was completed in 432 BCE and was as much a symbol of Athenian power as it was a place of worship. Built on the Acropolis, it was a 69, 5-meter long and 9-meter wide masterpiece. And here's the kicker. Each column had a subtle bulge, known as intarses, to correct optical illusions. They made sure the columns appeared straight to the human eye, proving that Greek architects didn't just build, they crafted illusions in stone. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the marble and grandeur. The construction of such monuments wasn't all philosophy and glory. It was a logistical nightmare involving thousands of laborers, many of whom were slaves. Imagine trying to source enough marble for a building project without the help of modern machinery. Just a lot of chiseling and heavy lifting. It's like trying to build a skyscraper using only hand tools and sheer determination. Now, let's hop across the Mediterranean to the Romans, who took what the Greeks started and went full throttle. The Romans were the original infrastructure geeks, laying down roads faster than a modern-day urban planner could say public transport. The famed Roman roads stretched over 400,000 kilometers across the empire. That's enough to circle the earth 10 times. They were built to last, with layers of stones, gravel and sand. Talk about a rock-solid investment in the future. And then there's the Colosseum, completed in 80 CE. This massive amphitheater could hold up to 80,000 spectators, about the same capacity as a modern sports stadium. It was the epicenter of Roman entertainment, where gladiators clashed and wild animals roared. But behind the grandeur was the grim reality of blood sports and human suffering, all in the name of public spectacle. The Romans knew how to put on a show, even if it was a bit like watching a reality TV program where the stakes were life and death. Romans also had a knack for aqueducts, those unsung heroes of ancient engineering. Imagine transporting water over long distances without the aid of pumps or electricity. Roman aqueducts stretched for hundreds of kilometers, using a slight gradient to keep water flowing into cities like Rome, which boasted 11 aqueducts by the 3rd century CE. These marvels made indoor plumbing possible long before the term modern convenience was coined. Yet, the Romans didn't just stop at engineering. They were innovators in public services too. Their public baths, or thermae, were sprawling complexes that functioned as social hubs, combining exercise, relaxation, and hygiene. Think of them as the ancient version of a wellness center, but with more marble and less yoga. But even the best-laid aqueducts can run dry. The collapse of the Roman Empire brought many of these innovations to a grinding halt. Without centralized maintenance, roads fell into disrepair, aqueducts crumbled, and the public baths became relics of a bygone era. It's a reminder that even the greatest technological advances require the backbone of political and social stability to endure. Now, as we marvel at the Greeks and Romans, let's not forget the limitations of their ingenuity. While they built architectural wonders, they were also constrained by their times. Materials were heavy, labor was intense, and the concept of safety standards was as mythical as Medusa. The ancient world had no cranes or bulldozers, just a lot of pulleys and a prayer. The Greeks and Romans laid the groundwork for modern engineering, but their systems were far from perfect. They were limited by the technology of their day, yet they pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The Romans, in particular, were masters of adaptation, borrowing and refining ideas from the civilizations they conquered. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that necessity truly is the mother of invention. So, the next time you marvel at a skyscraper or drive on a highway, spare a thought for the Greeks and Romans. They were the original dreamers and doers, turning stone and sweat into structures that would stand the test of time. Their achievements remind us that while technology may evolve, the human drive to build and innovate remains as strong as ever. And as our historical journey continues, we'll see how the echoes of ancient innovation resound in the modern world, shaping societies and laying the foundations for future generations to build upon. Stick around, because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that there's always more to discover on the other side of the horizon. As we sail away from the engineering marvels of the Greeks and Romans, it's time to turn the spotlight on the cultural legacies these ancient civilizations left behind. Let's demystify the toga-clad philosophers and the marble halls of justice, and see how these echoes of antiquity still shape our world today. When we think of ancient art, it's easy to get swept up in the romantic notion of toga-wearing sculptors chiseling away at pure marble. The reality, art in ancient times was a job, as much about craft as creativity. Take the famous Greek sculptures like the Venus de Milo, crafted between 130 and 100 BCE, and the Discobolus, dating back to around 450 BCE. These weren't just aesthetic endeavors. They were political statements, propaganda tools, and sometimes even sacrificial offerings. Imagine Instagram influencers, but instead of selfies, they left behind statues that screamed, "Look at my empire, isn't it grand?" And let's not forget the Romans, who perfected the art of the mosaic. These intricate designs covered the floors of villas and public buildings, serving as both decoration and social commentary. The House of the Faun in Pompeii, for instance, boasts a mosaic believed to depict the Battle of Issus, a nod to Alexander the Great's military prowess. These artworks were the memes of their day, conveying complex narratives in a single, stunning image. But art wasn't just about the visual. The Greeks gave us drama, literally. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the OG playwrights of the 5th century BCE, set the stage, pun intended, for Western literature. Their tragedies explored themes like fate, hubris, and the divine, leaving behind a legacy that still influences modern storytelling. Ever watched a soap opera and thought, "This feels Shakespearean"? Thank the Greeks, who laid the groundwork for dramatic narratives filled with flawed heroes and moral dilemmas. Philosophy, the ancient world's answer to Reddit threads, was another area where the Greeks shone. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were the thought leaders of their time, tackling questions about ethics, politics, and the nature of reality. They didn't just sit around in togas, contemplating their navels. Socrates, for example, roamed Athens streets, engaging in dialogues that were more Socratic method than sophistic monologue. His approach to questioning everything laid the groundwork for critical thinking, a tool we still use to navigate the complexities of modern life. And then there's Roman law, the backbone of modern legal systems. The 12 Tables, established around 450 BCE, were Rome's first attempt at a public legal code. The Romans were obsessed with order and structure, qualities that resonate in today's legal frameworks. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty and equality before the law have their roots in Roman jurisprudence, while the reality of Roman law was less about justice and more about maintaining social order, often skewed in favor of the elite. The principles endure, forming the bedrock of our judicial systems. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the romanticized vision of ancient cultures. Sure, it's easy to get caught up in the allure of grand temples and heroic epics. But the truth is, life in these ancient societies was often brutal and short. The average life expectancy for a Roman citizen, around 25 years. Forget the fountain of youth. They were lucky to have a fountain at all. Disease, war, and famine were constant threats, a stark reminder that the past wasn't all marble and muses. Yet, these ancient stories captivate us because they reflect the timeless human condition. The struggles of Achilles mirror our own battles with pride and destiny. The debates of the Roman Senate echo in modern political arenas, where power is as intoxicating and dangerous as ever. We see ourselves in these tales, finding both cautionary lessons and inspiration. So why do these ancient legacies still matter? Because they remind us of where we've come from and how far we've traveled. They show us that while the costumes and settings may change, the core of human experience, our capacity for creativity, ambition, and folly, remains remarkably consistent. The ancients weren't so different from us, grappling with the same questions, driven by the same desires. Their stories are our stories, and in understanding them, we gain a deeper appreciation of our own. In the end, the cultural legacies of the ancient world are like a well-seasoned stew, rich in flavor and complexity. They spice up our modern lives with insights and reflections, reminding us that history isn't just a series of dusty relics, but a living dialogue. As we close the chapter on this journey through time, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, using them to illuminate our path forward. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the story is far from over, and the best is yet to come.